This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr in the door. Also, Lisa Mateo. Lisa Mateo's here.
Good.
Diving into a 4-day work week. Lots of economic data. Also, waiting for a correction. Pandemic, Paul, down 34% just in 1 month. Suddenly, the shock of the pandemic. Then we had another soiree down 27%. And the latest one, we plunged. We cratered in 2023, down 11%. Where's the correction in this great bull market?
I think that was maybe April. We pulled back a whopping 5%. I'm not sure if that's
We plunged.
But here we're kind of steady here. We got some red and green on the screen here today. Some economic data this week. Earnings pretty much over. So we can kind of focus back on economic data in the Fed, Tom.
Maybe the Fed out to June 12th as well. Lots going on the data screen. I think Nathan did a great job there framing it. Karen Muscat did okay too.
Yep.
You could just tell she's got 1 foot still in Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all there is to it. Futures up 4, red and green on the screen. Dow a little bit negative, probably just Boeing. I haven't even had time to look. The VIX, that's a good indicator to begin Tuesday, 12.55%. We're on Apple CarPlay, Android Play as well. On YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcast. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. That's the quickest way to get to all the value add that we've got here on a Tuesday. We're in the Interactive Broker Studios, saving us with a data check. She's here, Lisa Mateo.
I am well and refreshed. Good morning. Futures right now, we've got red and green on the screen. NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. Dow futures, little change. S&P futures up about 0.1%. And this is all after the extended holiday weekend. Traders looking to inflation prints, also central bank speakers for any hints on the timing of interest rate cuts. Now, speaking of which, the Fed's Neil Kashkari told CNBC that policymakers have no reason to hurry with cutting rates. And Loretta Mester said the Fed should consider ways to communicate their message to the public better. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.93%. That's down a basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.47%, and that is little change. Looking at commodities, we have spot gold lower at $2,344 an ounce. We have Brent crude at $83.27 a barrel. WTI crude $78.93. Over to Apple, those shares are higher. They're up about 2%. This is after a string of discounts from retail partners helped its iPhone sales in China last month, with shipments rising 52%. And then Nvidia shares are up about 2%. That's on track to extend its post-earnings rally for a third consecutive session. And finally, yes, meme stocks back on the move. Yes, GameStop up 20%. AMC up nearly 4%.
I'm just not ready for this.
That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
It's GME, right?
Yes, GME.
GME. I mean, oh my, look at this.
GameStop.
So we went from 10 to 70, and then we came down. It's actually pretty elegant moving averages. 19 the close, and post-holiday, $23.50.
Up 24% today, pre-market trading. Up 8% year-to-date before we even started here. but down 18% over trailing 12 months. It's all over the place. And this is a $5.8 billion market cap company.
Okay, there we go. We say good morning, and we're going to begin on equities with a very smart research note from PNC Asset Management Group. Amanda Agati joins us this morning. Amanda, what I love about your note is the conviction of domestic over international, larger over lesser larger, I guess I should say. What's the value of cash now if you're in a steady as she goes portfolio?
Well, it's great to be with both of you. I always enjoy catching up with you. The value of cash is not all that much other than an opportunity cost. We really are not of the mindset that cash is ever a good investment opportunity. And while money market yields are certainly much more attractive today than they have been, in quite some time, given the Fed policy action, we'd be putting that cash to work in this environment.
How do you measure the exuberance of this bull market at PNC Financial?
I think, well, really, you just look at valuations. If you look at forward P multiples just on the S&P 500 alone, we're effectively priced to perfection. That feels pretty exuberant, but it also feels somewhat right, I think, relative to the short list of names that continue to lead the charge.
Yeah.
It's really a reflection of the Magnificent Seven or even the Fab Five in this environment.
Paul, when someone says that, I go to Walmart. It's just my vanilla call, WMT.
Yep.
The PE is 29. And if you figure out earnings growth, the PE is 27. Are you kidding me?
No, I mean, for a retailer with low, net margins, it's interesting. Amanda, so I guess, for folks that are thinking about this marketplace here, do you just be lazy and buy some of those big cap tech stocks? Because, boy, those are the ones that have been working for you for years. Or do you try to get a little bit smarter maybe and try to find some value somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has been a winner, and frustratingly so. But in the case of the Fab Five, they really do continue to have the fundamental chops, even at these lofty valuation levels, to continue raising the bar. So on the one hand, it's tough to step in at this entry point. On the other hand, the fundamentals just continue to be pretty strong. We think a pocket of opportunity is really on the quality side. Quality dividend growth at a reasonable price. Reasonable is a relative term in this environment, but there are some pockets of opportunity out there. You don't have to pick top five.
All right, so let's talk about what are some of the other sectors that you think screen well for you guys?
Well, I think it's a little early to get too cyclical in this environment. We've started to see a little bit of movement in some of the early cyclicals. Of course, it's a function of, are we getting close to that inflection point in the economic cycle? That's, I think, why you're seeing some of the meme stocks rally. Some of the small caps start to see a little bit of movement there. But we think it's a little bit too early to back up the truck in cyclical. So we're really leaning a bit more on the defensive side, a little bit more on the growth and tech-oriented side in this environment. I think we have a little bit of time to wait yet. Patience, a Guns N' Roses reference for you here on a Tuesday morning, is the theme, I think, right now.
How can someone that young know Guns N' Roses?
I know. What's good? I like that.
It's incredible.
Well, she went to Penn State, so she's in the Schreier School.
Well, naturally.
Honors College. You know what Schreier Honors College at Penn State's from William Schreier, former CEO and chairman of Merrill Lynch.
Yeah.
I mean, just a giant.
You go out to State
on
College,
Wall Street.
and that's what they have some very good technical work out there.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
Their major in Guns N' Roses
Exactly.
is good, with a double minor.
Definitely,
in Slash.
that's what I majored in. Yep.
Hey, man, how about in fixed income here? I mean, it's awful enticing to look at a 2-year United States Treasury at 4.92%. Do I stay there, or do I try to find some credit risk, perhaps?
We've been getting a lot of questions around what to do in this environment for fixed income portfolio positioning. It's really tough to back up the truck in credit-oriented exposures in this environment, even though they've been doing well. Where spreads have moved to and where yields certainly are sitting at, it doesn't feel like investors are getting paid to take on material risk in credit markets. So we're leaning investment grade, definitely higher quality. And we're also trying to resist the temptation or urge to lock in longer dated yields. Longer dated maturities, it just doesn't feel attractive in this environment. And when you look at the yield curve, it's just so flat. Investors aren't getting paid to lock in long duration yet either.
Amanda,
so we'd stay shorter.
Yeah, quickly here, Amanda, anybody that says back up the truck on the show gets a revisit. I mean, that's great. Can you back up the truck right now on AI?
Oh, absolutely. But I think the key as it relates to AI is that it is not just one stock, aka NVIDIA. I mean, we are big fans of NVIDIA, but the story goes so much further than just one stock or one industry. I think the key, really the secular bull theme, is really across the market and across sectors and industries. Any company, no matter how big or small, that can leverage that technology to enhance their processes and enhance profitability is going to win. And I think that's why some of the game is really changing. You're seeing utilities move pretty dramatically. It's such an odd AI play, but that's a good example of what we're thinking about. Much broader base play.
Thank you so much for starting us strong today. Amanda Magadi there with PNC Financial. Red and green on the screen, the VIX 12.52. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says a tragic mistake was made in an Israeli strike in Rafah that set fire to a tent camp housing displaced Palestinians. Local officials say at least 45 people were killed in Sunday's strike. Meanwhile, Spain has moved to formally recognize a Palestinian state, with Ireland and Norway set to follow. Israel is slamming the diplomatic move, which adds new pressure on Tel Aviv to alter its response to last year's Hamas-led attack. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, in a televised speech, says that the move's goal is to help Israelis and Palestinians achieve peace.
The recognition of Palestine is not against anyone, least of all Israel, a friendly nation that Spain values and holds in high regard, and with whom we aim to foster the strongest possible relationship. Furthermore, this decision reflects our absolute rejection of Hamas, a terrorist organization who is against the two-state solution.
Prime Minister Sanchez says our position is aligned with the UN Security Council resolutions. Closing arguments are scheduled to take place today in former President Donald Trump's criminal election interference case in New York. Loyola Law School professor and former federal prosecutor Lori Levinson says this is the last time both sides will get to address the jury.
What's key for the prosecutors in this closing argument is to corroborate Michael Cohen. Cohen is a very vulnerable witness. He has admittedly lied, cheated, stolen, and even gone to jail.
Prosecutors charged Trump with 34 counts of falsifying business records as part of an alleged scheme to silence claims of extramarital sexual encounters during his 2016 presidential campaign. He has pleaded not guilty. Finally, Bill Walton, UCLA Bruin standout before becoming a Hall of Fame center for his NBA career and huge in basketball broadcasting, has died after a battle with cancer at age 71. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Bill Walton changed basketball. You guys follow this way more than I do. What did he do to change the game? To me, it was he was just solid.
Well, you noticed that when he was with at UCLA. I mean, he was, you could see it, and the way I guess the best way I can describe it, that's why Kareem Abdul-Jabbar also patted him on the back, because when you're a center like that, I mean, you show the stance that you had in controlling the game. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. Yeah. He controlled the game.
I mean, to me, he was a precursor to Shaq.
Yeah.
And he was like the Neo Shaq, if you will.
And of all of his accomplishments on the court, off the court, behind the microphone, he was just dynamic.
And Tom, he was probably one of the most highest profile deadheads out there.
Oh yeah,
more than 1,000 shows. The dead to a person in the band loved to Bill Walton.
He'd go play, and I'm sure he was in there buying bootleg Dead.
Yeah.
I mean that's what we did.
Yeah.
There was a whole. You go in a record store in Boulder, and the whole right side aisle was bootleg Dead.
Right.
Like the younger people, Lisa's looking at me like, what? These are called record albums. Vinyl, and you've got little cassettes.
How your 78's doing, man?
I remember the 78's up in the attic.
Yeah.
Bill Walton, a great loss for sport. Futures up 6. Dow futures go the other way. NASDAQ with a nice lift. It's come back a little bit, but there's some Apple enthusiasm. Apple was indicating 194 here earlier. Is Anurag Rana scheduled? Rich, are you here today? Okay.
Yes.
I mean, Rangers won 2 games, so I thought maybe you'd take off, Anurag Rana scheduled this. Seriously, we'll have a really good discussion of all this AI frenzy over the weekend and what Apple's doing. Brent crude, $83, 29 cents a barrel, up fractionally. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by BNY Mellon's Insight. More than 100 dynamic sessions and countless opportunities to expand your knowledge, your network, and your growth. June 4th through 6th in Nashville. Register at insight.bnymellon.com. All right, futures. We've got red and green on the screen after the long holiday weekend. NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. Dow futures little change. S&P futures up about 0.1%. We have reports on consumer confidence, home prices. That'll get some attention on Wall Street today. Tomorrow, though, the Fed releases its Beige Book economic survey. That's followed by initial jobless claims, GDP and wholesale inventories on Thursday. And yes, Friday is April's PCE price index. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.92%, the 10-year yield at 4.46%. Companies making news, that's PayPal. They're up 1%. The Wall Street Journal reporting that it's planning on an ad business using data on its millions of shoppers. And then we go to OpenAI. The New York Times saying it's begun training a new AI model that would succeed the GPT-4 technology that drives ChatGPT. And then Bloomberg reporting that OpenAI has created a board to evaluate the safety and security of its AI models. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Paul, one of my themes this week, and I think into June, do I need AI? I'm just asking.
No, I think you can wait. I don't think you need to be on the forefront here.
I mean, what Lisa just said there in that great report, I mean, I get it. I talked to a family
Siri,
member.
You have Alexa. I think you're good.
Yeah, but I've never used Siri once. Like, how fast can you turn that off?
Siri. I use Siri all the time.
What do you use Siri for? Siri,
anything.
what's the what?
Any possible thing, I just ask Siri.
Okay, see? We'll get Tom into that.
Okay,
and that's all you need for AI, I think.
Right now, we're going to leap to one of our most astute guests. Michael Green is Chief Strategist, Simplify Asset Management, but all sorts of work across important houses, and of course, Parchment from Wharton as well. Mike, I love your note, and you go right to the heart of my argument. You say, quote, the inflation mantra is increasingly strained. My basic take is the Fed chat is now become secondary to the real economy chat. Is that where we are? Which what matters here is sprightly real GDP and nominal GDP?
Well, I totally agree with that, unfortunately, Tom. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're facing right now is that the lagging inflation metrics, which were designed to be smooth, they didn't work in 21 to alert us to the incoming inflation. They haven't worked coming out of 23 and into 24 to alert us to the falling inflation, is now giving way to increasing distress amongst those who need money, right? So the tightness is very clearly there. It's just a bifurcated economy.
It's a bifurcated economy. How does that play into the market? If we have a bifurcated America into an election year, do we have a bifurcated stock market in terms of performance and lesser performance?
Well, I think that's been very, very clear in the actual performance we've seen, both on a year-to-date basis and really incorporating since the 22 debacle. Small caps, value stocks, et cetera, have meaningfully underperformed. We've actually been in an environment in which companies that need capital, so we actually track a basket of names, for example, that we refer to as junk, right? So companies that are recurring issuers. I heard a joking reference to the performance of GameStop earlier today, for example, on the program.
No.
Those types of companies in general have meaningfully underperformed, while companies that are cash rich and are in a position to throw money at problems, whether those are AI or other issues, have been able to both buy back their shares, pushing them up higher, and drive the performance of their business.
I go to a toothpaste company that'll remain nameless. All you need to know the last 10 years, total return, 5.5% per year. I believe that's what you make in the money market.
I think that's what you make in the money. Yeah, exactly right.
There's just like two worlds out there. I'm sorry.
All right, Mike, let's step back a little bit. We've had a pretty solid earnings season. We just kind of finished up. We've got a Fed that presumably at some point, either this year or early next year, will be cutting rates. That sounds pretty constructive to me for risk assets. Where do I go?
Well, I think that's actually a really, really interesting point. So first, when we talk about the earnings season, remember, again, it's that bifurcated economy. NVIDIA, fantastic. McDonald's and others starting to talk about their customer base increasingly stressed and strained, moving back into a price war in fast food, for example, hardly a bullish sign for consumer spending. when you think about where to put money, I love what you guys just said. You're getting 5.5% on your money market funds. You're being given a free option, or actually a paid option, to take something to the side. And I would really point out to people that many of the allocation mechanisms that people use prevent them from even considering a change. If you were in a target date fund, for example, you've received absolutely no signal from the market that you should own more fixed income at 5% yields than you did at 0% yields. And so I think this is one of the real challenges that we face in the market is that fewer and fewer signals of cross-asset allocation are actually able to make their way to the end consumer.
All right. So given that kind of backdrop here, I mean, I don't know. It just feels like I want to go out and search for some value out there. I don't want to be just buying, the Nvidias and the Amazons of the world. Is that not worth my time?
Well, this unfortunately is one of the areas of primary research that I've spent a lot of time on, which is the growth of passive investing. Those strategies and the buyback activity from the companies associated with them place upward pressure on those shares, encouraging you to invest regardless of the value component to it. In fact, a passive index will receive a negative value signal. It will buy more of stuff that goes up with the next dollar that comes in. Right. So that's part of what we're seeing in the market is we're seeing that bifurcation, that separation.
What's the bifurcation of AI? I mean, Mike Green, you're a fancy guy with lots of fancy analytical efforts and lots of your resume reads like a who's who of hedge funds, et cetera. I look at it as a 2-part or 3-part AI. How do you look at it?
Well, again, Tom, you and I are very much aligned on this.
That's why we booked you. Mike, I don't book anybody who doesn't agree with me, so get over that.
There we go. That makes it easier. Okay. The dynamics in AI are really fascinating to me, particularly because of the impact it's likely to have in the knowledge economy. The way I describe AI, and I use it extensively, is it's like having an unlimited number of first-year investment banking analysts. They don't know what they don't know, but boy, do they work hard. Right now, as a manager, right, that actually creates conditions under which I suddenly have a workforce that is willing to work for $20 per month in almost unlimited fashion. Do I need to supervise them? Do I need to make sure that the quality that they're putting out is robust? Absolutely. But this has implications both for my own productivity and for our society. Candidly, I've got 3 kids who are in the process of coming out of college, all of whom are looking at those first-year investment banking roles and saying, what do I want to be doing? Right? Is this the direction that I want to go, given that I now have $20 a month competitors?
So, Mike, is that just NVIDIA? Or, I mean, I hear every single company in the S&P 500 on their earnings call. I don't care if you're a restaurant company, a mining company. Everybody's talking about AI. It's almost overwhelming for, I think, a lot of our listeners and viewers.
Well, I think that's actually, first of all, that's a positive sign that the hype is beginning to exceed the potential. But if you just think about it in a really clear one, an example of AI, just go back to the fast food industry since I introduced it earlier. Do you want a Coke to go with your meal? You usually order a Diet Coke, right? Does that increase upselling? Can that sort of prompt be given to a cashier or to a kiosk in order to drive additional business? The answer is clearly yes. We know that people respond to those prompts. The AI dynamic, being able to incorporate that, could theoretically drive additional business, even for something as low tech as fast food. With that said, the processors themselves and where the mania has basically been for investing, the NVIDIAs of the world, et cetera, if I go back to a kind of Porter's 5 forces model, and I think about the rising potential for competition coming from customers who have the potential to substitute, AI is very much a threshold technology. You either have the capability or you don't. And once you have it, then it becomes a question, is it a commodity or is it actually something that's deeply valued?
Mike Green, thank you so much.
We don't know the answer yet.
We don't know the answer yet. That's the heart of the matter. We'll follow this, of course, through 2025. Mike Green, thank you so much. We'll simplify there. Really important comments there on first-year banking. Boys, remember the first year you were in the business and
nonstop.
Everyone in the room was smarter than you.
Yep.
And couldn't, can I have air conditioning in my room?
Wow.
Mike Green, thank you so much. Futures up 5. The VIX index at 12.54. 10-year real yield, 2.14%, modestly elevated. It's going to be an interesting 4-day week, to say the least. Please stay with us from New York City for you. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures are mixed. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.2% at 18,921. We have Dow futures down 0.1% at 39,118. S&P futures up 0.1% at 5,327. Now, aside from more Fed speak economic data, traders also keeping an eye on potential technical problems, increased volatility, and that's connected with the switch to so-called T+1 rule. Equities will settle in one day rather than two. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.93%, the 10-year yield at 4.46%. Who's making news? That's Toyota. Their ADR is up about 1% right now. It's showing off prototypes of internal combustion engines that can run on hydrogen as well as gasoline and other fuels. And then you have the United Auto Workers Union pushing for a new election at the Mercedes-Benz plant in Alabama after it was recently defeated. Now, the union says the automaker interfered with that election. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Stanley Fischer, one of the giants of economics, one of my heroes, once said in a speech at the Economic Club of New York, he really got upset at somebody, and he said the percentage change of percent is a big deal. And it was literally Professor Fisher of MIT lecturing 1,200 people. The percentage change on the 10-year Japanese note, from the first of the year is a percentage change of 89%. It's almost doubled in yield, now over 1%. Joining us now on what this means for global Wall Street, Jane Foley joins us, head of FX strategy, Rabobank, to say the least. Jane, what happened this weekend, this long weekend in America, was what didn't happen. What didn't happen was Japan did not intervene in their busted economics. What does that yield indicate for the future of Japanese yen?
Well, I think it's not just about the 10-year here. I've got a chart in front of me here of the 30-year, and that is over 2%. And what it means over the long term is what will those Japanese life insurers, those Japanese pension funds do as a consequence of these rising yields? Are they going to reallocate more of their funds into domestic JGBs? Well, I think the answer to that is, well, yes, although it's very difficult to estimate what sort of time frame. And the other question is that if that is the case, if they try and avoid the hedging costs associated with buying treasuries, and they're going to buy more JGBs, what does that mean for U.S. treasuries too? So there's a lot of questions here.
Right.
Now the Bank of Japan is very aware of the sensitivity of what its actions might do across the market. Right. So it doesn't want to do anything too rapidly. It doesn't want to create too much fallout.
We don't do trilemma exercises after a Memorial Day weekend, but Jane Foley, just from a broader picture, because of all this experiment was to impart or impute inflation into the system. Do they risk losing the success of their recent inflation and get back to some sense of disinflation or the terrible fear of outright deflation?
Well, that's a risk, but I think what we need to do, and actually what the Bank of Japan have been trying to do for a long time, and Ueda, the governor, has been talking about this again quite recently, is that we need to separate out the type of inflation that they want, which is domestically driven inflation, which is effectively wage rises, and then the inflation that they don't want, which is imported inflation, which is the type of inflation which is clearly made worse when the yen weakens. Now, within Japan right now, a lot of the press articles in Japan are talking about how inconvenient, how that's unwanted, the price of imported goods just going up and up and up, and how that is affecting consumer confidence. And actually, it's likely to mean that real wages in Japan, which have been negative for about 2 years now, about 24 months, they may not turn positive until the end of the year because of this imported price inflation. So it's very, very unwanted. And that is what's interesting, how much rhetoric is going to be directed against that, at the forthcoming Bank of Japan meeting. Is there a risk that they will therefore maybe hike interest rates again in July rather than wait till October because the yen is so weak? Or will they instead tweak their bond buying program and push yields up further to try and stabilize the yen, when I think the June meeting, which is only a couple of weeks away now, is going to be really, really interesting.
So, I mean, it's interesting, Jane. I mean, I'm looking at the dollar yen here, 156.80. I can't imagine the Bank of Japan is comfortable with it at that level. What in reality can they do here? I mean, it just seems like the forces are mounted against it.
Well, that is the case because there's such a strong consensus, it would appear, that's taken the view, well, you know what, interest rate differentials are going to favor the dollar come what may, and therefore, the yen's on the back foot. But in a way that the market is so positioned in that one direction that perhaps it can give the Bank of Japan, the opportunity to surprise. I think there's a good chance that they could tweak their bond buying program in June. I think there's a very good chance that Ueda will mind his language a lot more in June, and rather than allow the market to think, he was disappointingly not hawkish in the previous meetings, maybe he is going to sound a lot more hawkish. So it's quite likely that he could have the opportunity to get the market on the back foot come June.
Jane, where's the opportunity right now? I got to make some big figure here to afford. I'm trying to keep up with Katie Greifeld. I got to go to the Olympics. Where am I going to make some money here, Jane, right now?
Well, one currency that was moving today was the Swedish krona. That's been undervalued so cheap for quite a long time. And suddenly it seems, well, look, the market's looking at it, seeing its trade balance really improving, and thinking, maybe that's one that could turn. When that does turn, it could turn quickly. I think Switzerland is going to be interesting. I think they could cut interest rates again in June. I think they want to keep that momentum, that negative momentum on the currency going whilst they can. I think the Bank of Japan is going to be interesting. And obviously sterling too, that's been very slowly recovering.
I agree.
Since the beginning of last year.
Okay, but this is important, Jane Foley. Torsten Slok over at Apollo out with a note. Here's the headline. The economy is not slowing down. How do currencies adjust, like in England, like here, to OMG, the economy is better than we ever expected?
Well, I think you can say that with respect to the US, but in the UK, there was a bounce back in GDP in the first quarter, but that's because there was virtually no growth in the previous 2 years. So where sterling's coming from, the reason why sterling is the second best performing G10 currency in the year to date, and the reason it was the second best performing G10 currency last year, was because it was at an all-time low against the dollar at the back end of 2022. That was Liz Truss. So what we're seeing with respect to the sterling is not a strong currency. We're just seeing a very slow crawl back to better levels, a slow recovery taking place. And I think the relatively boring political backdrop, despite the fact that there will be a general election on July the 4th, is helping that. It's helping investors recover from the chaos, the political chaos in the UK of the last few years. I think boring is good for investors. And I think sterling is very, very slowly coming back.
Jane, when you talk to your clients, is there anybody out there really putting on a serious bearish bet on the U.S. dollar? And if so, what's the play?
Question.
No, I don't think so. I mean, certainly, when the market's decided, yes, the Fed is finally going to cut interest rates, certainly, yes, the dollar can lose some ground. But we've got to remember that the US dollar is very overvalued against, on model-based estimates. And I think that's going to remain the case, because if you think about it, if we get a Trump government, for instance, a Trump presidency again, if Trump follows through with big tariffs, well, the Fed's easing cycle could be over really quite quickly, because that would add to CPI inflation. But the other thing, which I think is really important, is the big picture. And when we look at the big picture, what we see, with Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, we see the Chips and Science Act, trying to get firms back into the US to invest. And, the IMF on their spring meeting, they said, well, look, as a proportion of the available capital flows, what's going into the US, or what went into the US last year, was significantly more than what was going into the US prior to the crisis, around about 33%, they said, relative to from 19% before COVID. So from that point of view, you've got to think about America and Biden and probably Trump as creating an environment where it's attractive to invest. And so from that point of view, I think whilst, yes, the dollar could lose a little bit of ground once the Fed does start to cut rates, it's still going to be pretty overvalued for some time.
Jane, thank you so much. We're looking for some of that fiscal funding to fix the potholes on 58th Street. Jane Foley, thank you so much. At Rabobank. He does the news like Angel Fernandez calls balls and strikes. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The killing of an Egyptian soldier in a clash with Israeli troops at a Gaza border crossing further inflame regional tensions after an Israeli strike killed an estimated 45 Palestinians at a tent camp for displaced people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, through an interpreter, called the airstrike in Rafah a tragic mistake.
In Rafah, we have already evacuated about 1 million non-involved residents. And despite our best efforts not to harm the non-involved, unfortunately, a technical failure happened. We're investigating the case.
Meanwhile, there is growing international anger over the strike. The White House said the images of innocent civilians killed in the strike were heartbreaking. European Union defense ministers today are debating whether to allow Ukraine to strike targets deeper inside Russian territory with weapons that have been sent by member states. Closing arguments are expected today in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial in New York. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has a preview.
Prosecutors will present their summations first as they try to convince the jury that Donald Trump falsified business records. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump intentionally made or directed others to make false entries in business records, did so with the intent to commit another underlying crime, and sought to conceal the commission of that crime. Now, the defense only has to sway one juror because the verdict has to be unanimous. If the jury deadlocks, the judge can declare a mistrial. Judge Juan Merchan said last week he hopes the jury will get the case by tomorrow. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Finally, longtime and very popular umpire Angel Hernandez unsuccessfully, who sued the Major League Baseball League for racial discrimination. He's retiring immediately, but Hernandez, who is 62, he was criticized for, let's just say, missed calls and quick ejections.
Right.
And I'll leave it at that. So there you go, Angel.
I get going. Nick Nelson with the Twins, he writes a daily essay for the Minnesota Twins, goes through the 2 or 3 other umpires like this. And I really have trouble with it because there's so many good umpires.
They're very good.
With the speed of the ball. People don't understand the ball movement of some of these things coming in at 97 miles. You got all these umpires, they get it wrong, they get it right, they balance it out. And then there's these 3 or 4. Why can't they get rid of them? It speaks to the union. I mean, there's no other way to do it.
I mean, and I'm going to be, in fairness to Angel Hernandez, I mean, I couldn't even call a bread toasting contest. So these guys, like you said, the speed of the ball is going so quick. But I've never seen Major League Baseball players coming up to an umpire after the game like this, and many of them very critical of Angel Hernandez.
Here's a tweet, Paul. Brennan Miller, an umpire, I have no idea who he is. He missed 10 calls in the first 4 innings. He missed 22 calls in the game. 17 went against the Twins. So, you miss a call. Everybody misses a call, but they got a problem. I mean, it's a really, really serious. NFL doesn't have this problem.
But the NFL game now takes forever because of all the replay. But what I don't want to see is, the electronic umpire come into the game. I'd rather like to keep the human factor there. It's part of the game. You're going to get a lot of calls against you, a lot of calls for you. Just deal with it.
The only reason the Tigers are above 500 is the umpire calls.
Well, we pay them off well. We forgot to pay off,
I think they should bring the balloon back, to protect them. They're afraid they're going to get hit by the ball. If they had the big fancy balloon from 50 years ago.
Oh, did you? Yes. Have you seen the footage of umpires getting hit in the throat with the ball? I mean,
that's tough. Yep.
I would bring the balloon back so they're right in there. It's a tough job.
We didn't pay off the umpire with Amando Galarraga, but that's another story.
No, that's a different story as well. Angel, is it Hernandez? Hernandez? Yes. Angel Hernandez is out as an umpire. A lot of people have been looking for that. Your baseball report for the morning. The key report is Apple's doing better in China. That'll be one of our themes today. Apple lives there, NASDAQ. up 0.2%. From New York City on YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen after the long holiday weekend. NASDAQ futures up 0.2% at 18,912. Dow futures down 0.1% at 39,105. And S&P futures, they're a little changed at 5,326. To the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.93%, the 10-year yield at 4.47%. And we have commodity spot gold lower at 2,346 an ounce. Brent crude at $83 a barrel. Bitcoin actually down 1.5% at 68,352. We'll head over to T-Mobile. Their shares down 0.3%. The company has agreed to buy U.S. Cellular Corp's wireless operations, some of its spectrum assets for nearly $2.5 billion. So that news just coming out. And then BuzzFeed. Remember last week we told you former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, he announced an 8% stake in the company. Well, now Bloomberg reporting that he's pushing the company to make large-scale job cuts and include more conservative voices. BuzzFeed shares up more than 2%. And finally, Ransom Hub has claimed responsibility for a cyber attack on Christie's earlier this month. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. CNN out with a headline. It's a scorecard for Memorial Day weekend. U.S. box office on track to not be Barbie or Oppenheimer. Worst Memorial Day weekend in, I'm doing the math, 29 years, yep. 1995.
Yep.
Not good.
Just not. I didn't.
Are movie theaters dead, Paul Sweeney?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they're definitely not where they were pre-pandemic. I mean, I think that's clear. But there just wasn't anything this weekend to kind of get your excitement up. It didn't seem like. Certainly nothing in the zeitgeist. I mean, there was that Mad Max thing,
yeah, the Garfield
and the Garfield
movie.
Neither of which kind of generated much buzz. And so, I mean, they're putting out $25 million over the weekend. That used to be $150 million number back in the day.
I just, like the Mad Max thing with the girl who played chess on Netflix. Okay, great. When's it go to streaming?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like what? Yeah. Wednesday?
Yeah, you're right.
Next week? I mean, I don't get it. And, Paul and I, before we went to air, we're looking at Warner Brothers having a soggy Friday, to say the least. I mean, Warner Brothers Discovery. And, how many times, Paul, have we called the death of movie theaters?
Yep.
Which hasn't occurred, except there's now.
It is. I mean, it's just the box office, which had been kind of flattish for decades. It's in a decline here.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages with Lisa Mateo. It's brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop. Do that at ibkr.com/desktop. IBKR Desktop. And thank you, IBKR, for foundational support of what we do. Where do you start after a 3-day weekend?
You start with this interesting one from the Washington Post. It put a couple studies together, and it says that more home buyers, they're turning to the bank of mom and dad to buy a home, to get that down payment. So Freddie Mac did this analysis of their home loans. The share of young home buyers relying on older mortgage co-signers, like family members, most often the parents, mom and dad, is as high as it's been in at least 30 years. So that's how bad it's getting. Redfin suggests it picked up even more in 2023. And here's the thing, parents are even taking out loans against their existing homes to fund their children's homes.
Absolutely
this
nuts.
is how crazy it's getting.
Absolutely nuts.
And they're considering joint purchases with their kids as part of this long-term investment too. But the people who are being left out are the people who don't have that family inheritance.
Well, they're out on Twitter, so there'll be great feeds of busted properties. And there's a fancy place in Nashville. Taylor Swift has a unit in this fancy place. And they do the own versus rent differential in that fancy place in Nashville. It's like New York City, Paul.
Yeah.
It's like no one in their right mind would buy. It's like a money pit.
Yeah.
And it's happening more around the country.
Well, I think with the young folks, they got the student debt and all that kind of stuff. That it's tough there. And with the interest rates where they are, again, make it.
Or we're becoming like Europe. Everybody, not everybody, but many more people rent in Europe than here.
Yeah.
Parents are taking out loans
in order to
home equity loans, probably.
I'm lost on that. Next.
Yeah, I know. Are you gonna give the cherubs a down payment for that home? That's the question. Okay, this one is about the streaming wars, right? Because you hear a lot about these bundled TV offerings. You heard about Comcast and things like that. But will it compete with Americans who are kind of doing their own DIY bundling because they're sharing the accounts with family members, friends, co-workers, even though some of those things may kind of violate the service agreements that you're not supposed to share? So that's the question. Consumers are tired of the subscription costs, right? And then you have the companies who want to keep the customers. So you have Comcast doing these bundlings. You have Disney, Warner Brothers, doing these bundlings. You have the ESPN, Fox trying to do the sports streaming bundling. But the experts are saying the DIY bundling is better deal.
I dealt with this weekend, and I will cancel 2 services this week. I haven't gotten to it. I'm going to leave the names out of it.
It's easy to. But I mean, the number one issue here, or one of the big issues for the streaming companies that you didn't have with a cable television or satellite, it's very, very easy to cancel your streaming service. It's a click of a button. And so, and that means churn, and they don't want churn. So in order to minimize churn, they're creating these bundles, and maybe that'll minimize churn. So, but again, Netflix has been very good about, clamping down on the sharing of passwords. So we'll see.
I know. I still got mine on it. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Apple, the developers conference next month, right? Big. But they're betting on its giant customer base to kind of give it that edge in the AI space. So what they're doing is they're taking this different approach to AI. They want to focus on the tools that ordinary consumers can use. Kind of like what Tom, what you were saying last week. Like, what does this mean for me?
I want Mark Gurman. I want Mark Gurman to tell me what's the so what, and I'm not there yet.
Yeah, so they're doing exactly because of what things you're saying, and not just you, but a lot of people. It's this new strategy, Project Gray Matter. So they have a set of AI tools that the company is going to integrate into apps like Safari, Photos, and Notes. But there's other features, right? They have Siri Personal Assistant. That's going to get an upgrade. Siri's getting an upgrade. They have generative AI for emojis with software that can create custom emojis on the fly based on what you're texting. So if you're texting someone like, hey, let's go out for dinner for pasta on Friday, a little pasta emoji will automatically pop
And that's going to make my life so much better.
And that's going to make your life so much better.
Oh my God, is that where we are these days? Okay.
But it's just about making things easier for their customers. That's
I don't think at this conference, again, the developer conference, I guess it's June 7th.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot built up in this stock. I think investors want to see something transformative as it relates to AI to get that bump in the stock. I'm not sure they're going to get it. I don't know.
It's tough.
We'll talk
There's
to Anurag Rana in
There's a
little bit.
lot of competition because there you got Microsoft, Alphabet, Google,
So
OpenAI.
this is what, June something?
Yeah, June 7th, I think.
It's like right around the Fed meeting. I mean, is it more important than the Fed meeting?
That's a good question.
Instead of doing the Fed decides, we can do
I'm sorry,
Apple decides.
it's June 10th. I stand corrected.
Two days
It's June
before.
10th, the developers conference.
2
There you
days
go.
before the Fed meeting. Okay. You got anything else, or is that it?
Yes. Summer sales. That's what we're talking about. Shop till you drop. Okay, so the Associated Press gave this breakdown. They talked about Target cutting prices, right? They talked about Walmart cutting prices, Aldi, food shopping. A lot of it is food, beverage, essential household items because their budgets are tight. Even restaurants, you have McDonald's introducing that $5 meal deal. They want to do that. So a lot of CEOs are saying that people are becoming more price conscious, more selective. They're doing the store brands more than the national
That's what
brands.
I'm doing. I'm doing the store brand more.
I started doing that too, yeah.
Well, more for June. Lisa Mateo, thank you. Lisa Mateo there with the newspapers as well. Red and green on the screen. Futures up 7. NASDAQ leads the way up 0.2, make it 0.3%. The VIX churns 12.50. The 10-year real yield for global Wall Street 2.15%, and that is elevated to say the least. Dollar flat. Sweeney, I thought it was some great questions to Jane Foley there. Euro yen, I can't round it up. 171 on Euro yen. Like when is the when of the yen? Very poetic there. As well. And Brent crude, $83.22. NYMEX up a stick, 78.87. Brooks and Dunn, or Dunn, they have said this was the pinnacle of their career. They wrote this together. Good morning.
It's where I found Jesus. Where I wrecked my first car. I tore it all to pieces. I learned the path to heaven is full of sinners and believers. Learned that happiness on earth ain't just for high achievers. I come to know there's life at both ends of that red dirt road.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Bloomberg Surveillance, a holiday lengthened work week. Lisa Mateo darkens the door. Barr showed up. Amazing. Lisa Mateo and Michael Barr with us this morning. Coming up, we've got a mystery guest, tanned and rested. Damian Sassauer will join us here. We're on Android. We're on Apple. Apple CarPlay out with the new. Apple CarPlay out with a new iteration. You're going to be able to talk to your dashboard and say, "Put on Lisa Mateo."
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be very cool. That's not out yet, but they're coming out with it. They told me. People at Apple told me that. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. And you can search for Bloomberg Podcast, and you'll get us there. I haven't even gotten the live chat. I'll get in the live chat right now as we skewy. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, and we're brought to you by BNY Mellon's Insight. 3 days of countless opportunities to expand your knowledge and put your practice at the forefront of wealth management industry. June 4th through June 6th in Nashville, Brooks & Dunn's Nashville. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. Let me spell that, insight, INSITE.bnymellon.com. And for BNY Mellon and Paul Sweeney, we're doing Nashville today. Brooks & Dunn, Gary Allen coming up, as well as Casey Musgraves. I mean, Nashville's Nashville, Paul. It's going to be fun.
I know, and that's where our next guest actually went to undergraduate in Nashville. So I'm going to get some dives, some local hangs to go to from Damian.
Vanderbilt is, it's very difficult.
Venerable institution.
It is very venerable, like Lisa Mateo. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, here is the venerable Lisa Mateo.
And in the chat, I have another nickname they've given me. Lovely viewers, Max Mateo, because my TJ Maxx
there you go.
fascination. They say I always do the bargains.
You're in the new movie with Anna, what's her name?
Oh, the Mad Max. Yes. Right. Good morning, guys. Well, we have red and green on the screen. Futures are mixed after the extended holiday weekend. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. Dow futures, little change. S&P futures up 0.1%. Traders are looking for inflation prints. They're looking for central bank speakers for any hints on the timing of interest rate cuts. We have the Fed's Neil Kashkari told CNBC that policymakers have no reason to hurry with cutting rates. And Loretta Mester said the Fed should consider ways to communicate their message to the public a little bit better. We go over to the bond market. The 2-year yield 4.93%. That's down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.47%, and that is little changed. Over to commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,346 an ounce. Brent crude $83 a barrel. WTI crude $78 a barrel. Apple shares, they're higher. They're up nearly 2%, and this is after a string of discounts from retail partners really helped its iPhone sales in China last month, with shipments rising 52%. Then you have Nvidia shares up nearly 3%, on track to extend its post-earnings rally for a third session in a row. And finally, yes, the meme stocks, they're back on the move. GameStop up 24%, and we have AMC up nearly 5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Joining us now, Damian Sassauer, brilliant for Bloomberg Intelligence. Lots of good. What's your next event?
My next event, we have an emerging market event coming up, I believe, in October. I'll get the exact date for you, but I believe early October we're going to have a... in New York.
Oh, in New York.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't tell you about my events that I have in other countries, places.
Yeah, I understand it. There's a bull market theme here. SPX up, NASDAQ out to new record highs right now. Does it feel like a bull market in your world of EM frontier economies? Those following the Fed?
It does, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. It's volatility. I mean, the compression involved because equities are up, because risk has, and so it extends to FX and extends to EMFX. So even though you have emerging market currencies that are pretty much down versus the dollar year to date, volatility is off so significantly that it just becomes carry trader paradise. So it just becomes that much less expensive for you to clip coupons in emerging markets, and that's what we're seeing here. So yeah, it feels bullish to me.
All right, so where are we going for the carry here.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's Mexico for me. I mean, I got to tell you, and I heard your last guest, Gene Foley, who I admire, like there's none other. But, what it comes down to me is forget euro yen, forget dollar yen, it's Mex yen, right? I mean, if you look at peso yen, we're at an all-time high, 941. I mean, I think we're at an all-time high in euro yen also. But that is the carry trade.
Mex yen.
Mex yen?
Peso yen, that's correct.
So what do you do there?
You're buying peso and you're shorting yen. That's basically the trade. And it's just, look, it's a low yielder that you're funding in versus a very high yielder in the double digits that you're just clipping coupons in. And look, Mexico has been just a darling.
From the pandemic, Damien, from the pandemic low, Mexico has strengthened against the yen 122%.
Unbelievable.
Are you saying that trend is going to continue, or do you bet that it will reverse?
Oh, I think it will continue. I think we're seeing real evidence of nearshoring in Mexico, so there's fundamental ballast there. We have an election that's coming up, and I think it's going to be, business as usual. It's going to be a Morena candidate, Claudia Sheinbaum, more of the same. That's good for markets. And I think, look, Mexico is not that emerging market proxy it used to be. It actually tracks the dollar pretty closely. It's almost like a reverse way for an emerging market investor to kind of track the dollar. But I mean, look, I just think, I think there's tailwinds to the Mexican peso, and I think, if you listen to Jane Foley and what she's saying about the yen, there's going to be more pain ahead there. I mean, UATA wants wage inflation, doesn't want import inflation, and I think he's going to get the latter. So, what does that mean for pensions and insurers who have to move further out along the curve, who need to buy JGBs, basically blocking out treasuries? I mean, there's a lot of negative risk there in my mind.
Paul, to give you an idea, and you can do this on the Bloomberg terminal, I know Mr. Bloomberg's in his car right now listening, MXNJPY.
That's a thing?
Currency Q roll. Yeah, you get it. You get to
this.
the world of Damien Sassower. And Paul, it's out 3-4 standard deviations, strong Mexico versus weak yen. It's back to where it was in the great financial crisis, but critically, before the great financial crisis, not at 9 yen per peso, whatever that number is. It was out at 14. So, Damien, the phrase that we have is room to move on strong peso.
I mean, so here's the trade we're walking out. Sometimes I'm buying like Zimbabwe sovereign debt. Today I'm buying Mexican peso shorting the, I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. You mentioned Zimbabwe. We can't really mention Zimbabwe. I mean, you're just giving my asset class a bad name, Paul. But there are some economies that I guess are Zimbabwe-ish, and I think of Turkey, Nigeria, Egypt, Uruguay, and Dominican Republic. So you want to talk about that bull-on mentality that's gripping emerging market investors. They are reinvesting in those markets. Those are notoriously volatile, high-risk markets. And to go in local currencies, Mr. Bloomberg knows, I mean, this is really risky stuff, and we're seeing a lot more investors looking at those markets. Distressed but not defaulted EM debt has rallied sharply. I mean, that's what people are looking at, this idiosyncratic carry story.
When you talk about, say, Egypt, are you basically synthesizing your guess on IMF action?
Absolutely.
Into your trades?
Well, it's not just IMF action. It is other Middle Eastern countries that have obviously backstopped the Egyptian peso. There's a lot of Middle Eastern money from Qatar and the UAE and Saudi that are basically heading there. And in Turkey, it's much the same thing. So you do have these alternative backstops to the traditional IMF money that might be feeding into the bullish sentiment there. But I look at Dom Rep. I look at Uruguay. I mean, I look at some of those Latin America.
You mean Uruguay?
Yeah. So
How
Uruguay.
Do you pronounce it?
Uruguay.
Uruguay. How do you pronounce Montevideo?
it's not like that. But what I'd say is, what I'd say about Uruguay is, it's kind of a similar thing because it's a play on Argentina. The fact that Argentina, are they going to get their IMF dollars? And if they do, you know where that money's headed? It's headed to Montevideo. So it's basically headed to Uruguay. So that giving that So there's, again, you're right. There's a lot of IMF. And, the IMF, is meeting today on Ukraine, right, to discuss the release of the next $2.2 billion tranche of money. Hopefully that does get approved. And, hopefully things there quiet down also.
Do you enjoy a 4-day work week, or is it better to have a Damien 5-day work week?
I work 7 days a week, Tom. I don't sleep. Even when I am not working, I'm thinking about work constantly. Mr. Bloomberg knows this.
We need therapy.
Therapy?
He may have Fridays off. I don't know.
I was explaining to a young twerp this weekend, happened to be an issued offspring, And I said, "Do you understand? There's no days where we don't work." Like it was like dad lecture.
I'm always reading. I'm always listening. I'm always watching. I just can't help it. I'm a nerd, I guess.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I'm from Nashville. Dirk's Bentley Whiskey Pub. By the way, Nudie's Honky Tonk Central, the Broadway Roadhouse. These are all good bars on Broadway.
Damien, Pancake Pantry.
Dirk's Bentley went to Vandy. You know that? He graduated a year after me. Yeah.
But
Country Music Award winner.
Pancake Pantry.
Pancake Pantry,
yes.
Go. Oh, yeah, you gotta go. It's amazing you know that. How about meat and 3 potatoes or meat and 3 sides? You know that
exactly.
that mom's kind of, that's a kind of eating down in the South.
And then there's a third Coast Cafe if it's still there.
I don't know if it is. I know that place.
You're shocked I know this stuff.
This is kind of weird.
Do you remember the Impala that was parked in the gas station next to the Bluebird?
I don't remember.
I came this close to buying that Impala, but I didn't think I could drive
it's still sitting there with a number scratched on the window. 605 area code.
Paul Sweeney with BNY Mellon in Nashville. That's coming up first week of June. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The U.S. is weighing its response to the Israel airstrike in Gaza that killed at least 45 people in a Palestinian camp for displaced people. Bloomberg's Jody Schneider has the latest from Washington.
The White House said in a statement over the weekend that these images of the innocent civilians killed in the airstrike were heartbreaking. We've seen some reporting that the Biden administration is reviewing whether the strike violated a U.S. red line on Israel's conduct of the war. Although we've seen this before with things, going into Rafah was supposedly a red line, and how the administration responds will be the real question now.
Bloomberg's Jody Schneider in the nation's capital. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the airstrike Sunday at the tent camp in Rafah a tragic mistake. Today, closing arguments are scheduled to take place in New York in former President Donald Trump's criminal election interference case. Loyola Law School professor and former federal prosecutor Laurie Levinson says this is the last time both sides will get to address the jury.
The prosecutors have to put the pieces together for the jury. How the documents, the checks, the emails, the phone records corroborate what Cohen has to say.
Loyola Law School professor Laurie Levinson. Prosecutors charged Trump with 34 counts of falsifying business records as part of an alleged scheme to silence claims of extramarital sexual encounters during his 2016 presidential campaign. He has pleaded not guilty. Finally, it's another case of an unruly passenger on an airplane. A man accused of running naked down the aisle of an Australian domestic flight, knocking down a flight attendant, forced the plane to turn back. He was arrested by police at the airport. The incident happened in what was scheduled to be a 3-hour, 30-minute Virgin Australian flight last night from the west coast city of Perth to Melbourne on the East Coast. The airline said in a statement the flight returned to Perth Airport due to a disruptive passenger. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it as well. Paul, let's get back to the theme of the day. It's a bull market. I get the exuberance, and I'm hearing about it, is people that are in tech are cashing in on real estate, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I don't feel it out there, and maybe it's just the zip codes we're living in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think.
What did you see in the Shore this weekend?
The Shore was great. We had great weather. A little bit dicey yet yesterday, but great weather, and people were out and about. A little unruly in certain parts of the Jersey Shore, Wildwood. Thank you very much.
You can say that.
But that happens. But places were packed.
Lisa, what'd you see?
I talked to a manager of a place last night. We stopped by for a beer at a marina. He says a great opening weekend. Opening weekend.
Yeah, and everybody said the traffic was mental. I mean, it was like never before.
Yeah, you had to leave early. Like we left at the crack of dawn to go to the Jersey Shore if you're going for the day. So it wasn't too bad. But yeah, beautiful. A lot of people on the beach enjoying it.
Be careful. Extend your 3-day weekend if you can. It's a great and beautiful thing. We're not. We're working. Futures up 10 from New York City on YouTube. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures are mixed after the long holiday weekend. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%, Dow futures little change, S&P futures up 0.1%. We have reports on consumer confidence, home prices. That'll get some attention on Wall Street today. Tomorrow, the Fed releases its Beige Book economic survey. That's followed by initial jobless claims, GDP and wholesale inventories on Thursday. And finally, Friday, it's the PCE deflator. To the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.92%, down 2 basis points. A 10-year yield at 4.45%, and that is little changed. Companies making news: T-Mobile. It's agreed to buy U.S. Cellular Corp's wireless operations and some of its spectrum assets for nearly $2.5 billion. T-Mobile shares right now down about 0.2%. PayPal, they're up 1%. The Wall Street Journal says it's planning on an ad business using data on its millions of shoppers. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. This is a joy. In studio with us, we so rarely see him, is Michael Cushman. He's with Morgan Stanley.
Heard of him?
In his public service to Morgan Stanley, literally as a national treasure, goes back decades and decades. The Parchment is a wonderful path from Princeton to the London School of Economics and then to Columbia. What was it like to come out of Princeton and, like so many in this era, wander over to LSE and you wanted to buy the painting a beverage, and they were like this thing out of the Rockefeller Foundation saved LSE years ago. What was it like the first day at LSE after the Kool-Aid of American economics?
It was a very different educational experience.
Yeah.
It was sort of mass market versus little classes and little precepts and things like that. And you had some famous professors teaching these big seminars, big lectures.
Give us one name. I mean, I think of Davendorf, but give us others.
Well, this guy was Stephen Nickel, who taught econometrics, who was one of the first members of the MPC when the Bank of England was made independent. Mm-hmm. There was a guy named Partha Dasgupta who became a big professor at Cambridge eventually, and I think he's Sir Partha
It was
Dasgupta.
this incubus because they didn't make that much money at LSE. And basically, it was like the Louisville AAA ball team for Chicago and Harvard, and to an extent Princeton. I mean, the ferment that you were in academically is extraordinary. What's the ferment of this bull market we're in, this time we're in? To me, there's a gross underestimation of the nominal GDP pop going on right now.
Well, I think that's exactly right. That you just look at nominal spending and nominal GDP growth the past couple of years and current levels, and it's as good as it can be. You talk about Goldilocks. This is kind of it. Inflation's falling. It gets stuck, but it's falling. But nominal GDP growth is high. Real growth is high. Real rates are high by historical standards, and not excessively high by the decade of the 1990s and early 2000s, but high by certainly the last 20, 25 years. So you're getting rewarded pretty much on everything right now. Real estate prices are up. Bond yields are attractive, whether you look at government bonds, emerging market debt, corporate bonds, and then you look at equities, and earnings are rock solid and going up. We did have an earnings recession in 2022 for a couple of quarters, and it was over, and then up we go. But as long as nominal GDP growth is strong, central banks have your back. They're all itching to cut rates. When was the last time we saw central banks cutting rates with growth this strong?
Yeah. So, Michael, you go back to Princeton reunions. For the last 15 years, nobody wanted to talk to you. There was no interest rates. There's no reason to talk to the fixed income people. Now, you can get returns so many places in your market. Where are you telling your clients to go these days? I can sit in a 2-year treasury and get darn near 5%.
It's tough. Money market fund assets are still at record highs in the U.S. and still rising because unless you go out the yield curve into corporate bonds, high yield emerging markets where you can get 5.5% to 8%, cash rates you can get on a short duration bond fund, you get 6%. Mm-hmm. Doing nothing. Inflation calls somewhere between 2% and 3%. That's a 3% real rate of return on de minimis risk taking. That's a tough act to beat unless you become into growth oriented assets like equities, this or that. Why extend duration? Why extend maturities to get not paid very much to take on that additional risk?
I don't think you're getting paid at Morgan Stanley Investment Management to sit in 2-year treasuries, though.
No, which is why we're trying to create strategies which can make you, 6 to 8% over
How
time.
can you do that with where spreads are? Basically, folks, the yield on whatever corporate has come in as compared to the sovereign, it's very similar yield. How do you, quote unquote, create strategies given the perfection of this market?
You don't take duration risk. You stick to floating rate notes. There's a lot of asset-backed securities which are floating rate that are SOFR plus 200 to 300. So you get 7% plus, taking almost no interest rate risk, taking credit risk, but credit risk on the back of a market where asset prices are rock solid.
Do you miss LIBOR versus SOFR?
I still cannot stop saying LIBOR.
Yeah,
I have to,
exactly.
Did you get the young Turks say to you, "Oh, you old fossil"?
Yeah, almost.
There was a solution
LIBOR,
looking for a
what's that?
problem there. That's in my case.
Paul Savas.
All right, one of your notes here, I see
LIBOR
Japan.
nostalgia.
When you and I started on Wall Street back in the 80s, Japan was the bomb. You had to do a stint over in Japan. You had to have a play there. Non-Japan Asia, we used to call it. Then for 20, 25 years, we didn't hear about Japan. Now it's in everybody's notes. I have to talk about Japan. Can you tell us what's going on in Japan? What's changed in the last year or two that Warren Buffett and lots of other smart folks are looking at?
It's been changing for a while. It's taken a long time to work. When you talk about the lagged effects of monetary policy, when Kuroda was made head of the Bank of Japan and Abe was prime minister back in 2012, they engaged in a policy regime to remake Japan. It took a while to work, but remember, the yen was at 80 to the dollar in 2012.
Yep.
It's at 156 today. And historically, it would go 80 to 100, then back to 80, 80 to 100, back to 100. They couldn't get it to depreciate and stay depreciated, but now they're achieving it. And one reason is that real rates were actually really high the past 20 years in Japan relative to the rest of the world.
Frame out a 10-year U.S. real rate of 2.14%. We were down a little accommodative last week. We've come back. Is that a collared trade out in years, or can that explode higher to some higher real rate that's an angst?
I'm still a little worried that real rates can move higher in the U.S. simply because of the robustness of the U.S. economy and the fact that central banks want to cut rates in addition to the fact, considering where we already
Let's
are.
go away from your remit. What does that do to the stock market if we get a 2.20, 2.25% 10-year real yield?
I think it's more reflecting the rate of return on capital that exists in the U.S. right now, that it's actually not driven as much by policy. The U.S. yield curve is pretty inverted, but the market is pretty confident that inflation is contained. Down the road, break evens are pretty low, actually. It's a reflection of the demand for capital, the return on capital coming from the public sector and private sector. Manufacturing CapEx has exploded the past couple of years. You just read what the tech companies are spending on hardware and equipment.
All right, so given that backdrop, I don't know, what does our Federal Reserve do? We've got this WIRP function on the Bloomberg terminal. I have no idea what that's telling me. What do you think the Fed's going to do here?
The best thing is to sit tight and wait.
Okay.
My view is this: the Fed should be like a doctor. What's the Hippocratic oath? Do no harm first. If things are going well, don't mess with it. Just sit tight and wait for something to change materially. Would be overwhelming evidence either to cut rates or, heaven forbid, raise rates. It's not inconceivable that rates go up, maybe not this year, but sometime next year. And I think one of the issues I've had with cutting rate, the amount of rate cuts priced into this year, that it would create a need to raise rates into end of 2025, because the economy would end up being too strong.
So do you talk to Ellen Zentner about we could have a raising rates?
She's not really in that camp.
That's why we're looking for some theater here. I'm just busting your chops.
I think it's really about the next 6 to 12 months look pretty good. I mean, how rates are likely to 80% chance they go down, or 20% nothing happens. That's it. And after that, who knows?
Huge valuable. Micah Cushman, thank you so much. He is with and venerable at Morgan Stanley, to say the least. The VIX is 12.48, which is what, unched for the last 4 months?
Exactly.
Like a rock here with that
Solid.
quietude. Futures up 8. The Dow futures go the other way. Is that a Boeing thing? Is Boeing like
I don't
doing
know.
well this morning?
I just don't know what to do with
Boeing. The Dow's like out of it this morning. Who knows? NASDAQ up 0.3%. A little bit of an apple lift there. We'll talk about that. Bitcoin, we haven't mentioned, 68,000. McGlone would say that's an opportunity.
Exactly.
Oil, Brent crude, $83.33 a barrel. Lisa Mateos entered the studio with a completely healthy breakfast. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures are mixed this morning. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. Dow futures, they're little change at 39,122. S&P futures up 0.1% at 5,329. Now, aside from more Fed speak and economic data, traders also keeping an eye on potential technical problems, increased volatility, and that's connected with the switch to so-called T+1 rule. Equities will settle in 1 day rather than 2. We head over to the bond market. The 2-year yield at 4.92%. That's down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.45%, and that is little changed. Companies making news, we have Toyota. Their ADR is up nearly 1% right now. It is showing off prototypes of internal combustion engines that can run on hydrogen as well as gasoline and other fuels. And then United Auto Workers Union pushing for a new election at the Mercedes-Benz plant in Alabama. This is after it was recently defeated. Now, the union says the automaker interfered with the election. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. In studio now, I think for the first time since the pandemic, we are just thrilled to have with us Win Thin. He is global head of market strategy at Brown Brothers Harriman on foreign exchange and all. But Dr. Thin, thank you so much for joining today. And I have to go to what I've had so much mail, particularly out the live chat on YouTube. Thank you for the truly international excellence we're seeing on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, search Bloomberg Podcast. There's a live chat. And the live chat is about climate change and heat. Now, you live this in Rangoon, now Yangon, Myanmar. You and I call it Burma. But the answer is to Southeast Asia, to the Sahara, up into Spain and all. We are seeing climate change in real time. What have you learned of all your contacts in Southeast Asia about this heat wave, this climate change to come?
What I think we're finding is that very few countries are really fully prepared for the scale of problems that are weather-related. And unfortunately, I think most of you know the story that the climate change is really going to hurt the most poor countries, the poorest and sort of least equipped to deal with this issue. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Burma, Thailand, all those countries are heavily populated. Indonesia, I throw in there as well. Heavily populated, very poor, and just really without many of the resources to combat that.
Within all of your work, and particularly in the Pacific Rim, does it shift the agricultural conversation forward, which changes our economic bets?
Yeah, that's if you want to take the dystopian view, there's many strains of thoughts that the world's agricultural food supply is at really serious risk over the next 10, 20 years. Again, I don't want to get too Mad Max on this, but it is a serious issue that I think that we keep pushing it down the road, but it's coming. The future is coming closer and closer. It's sooner than we think. And all of a sudden, maybe Mad Max doesn't seem so far away right now.
Right. With the humidity, Paul, you're seeing temperatures that are calculated out well above 105 degrees day after day after day.
Florida is getting a huge heat wave in May, right?
Yes.
It's everywhere.
Brown Brothers Harriman, to me, Tom, that's one of the just iconic gold plate names on Wall Street.
It is.
I love Brown Brothers. Are you guys at 140 Broadway?
Yes, we're back. For a while, it was a long story, but we were away for a little bit at the foreign exchange department. We are back.
140 Broadway, Tom, to me is one of those iconic names. Addresses down in Lower Manhattan.
They accept bow
Jay
ties.
was there.
That's great.
It was just Brown Brothers Harriman and 140 Broadway, folks, right across from the World Trade Center. Iconic building, Lower Manhattan for global Wall Street. When talk to us about China, is China investable, non-investable? It's a big part of the MSCI, so I have to be there. How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, Paul, it's a big debate that many of our clients are having right now. We have to look at it in sort of structural and cyclical terms. I think from a cyclical perspective, it's not looking so great, right? We know they're in a downturn, they're struggling to grow, they're at their about 5% target. There's been some minor stimulus here and there, but in general, I think the Chinese economy has been underperforming. So gone are the days of 6, 7, 8, 9%. Yep. That was the no-brainer for China. But from a structural standpoint, we know there's a huge debt overhang. We know the property sector is in serious trouble. We had some measures a week or so ago. Again, just sort of pushing on a string. I think to me, it's a classic EM debt crisis that's in the works. And to me, the way that those are resolved is bankruptcies, huge haircuts, possibly banking sector crisis strains, et cetera. I think China can kind of kick the can down the road a bit, but I think there's a lot of bad news that's still to come. I think we've sort of maybe gotten ahead of ourselves and gotten a little more optimistic on China. So, long story short, I wouldn't say it's uninvestable, but from sort of structural, cyclical standpoint, I think there's a case to be underweight.
Yep.
Given the negatives.
Tom and I have been talking about for the last several weeks here. The Japanese yen, we're 156.72 here on the dollar. What's going on in Japan, and what do you think the Bank of Japan really would like to do over the next coming weeks and months?
Yeah, no, Paul, I think that's the debate that we've all been having in the FX markets for the last few weeks. They surprised us with a couple of interventions back in late April, early May. I hate to say that, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, because there's many goals. But if the goal was just to stabilize the exchange rate and just sort of calm the markets down, then I'd say it's successful. We've been in sort of 155, 160 range really for the last couple months, and I think they'd take it. I think they'd say, hey, I think what bothered the Bank of Japan and the policymakers was just a steady and sort of a accelerating weakness in the yen. So for now, they've put some support under it. I think we sort of chug along. The thing I would also say is that the Bank of Japan avoided this sort of big catastrophe in the JGB market that everyone was afraid of. JGB yields didn't spike up when they hiked rates. Things are calm. The economy's kind of chugging along. So I think it's sort of the best of both worlds right now for Japanese policymakers. I give them I say an A- on it.
Okay. With this win thin of Brown Brothers Harriman here on frontier economies and EM economies as well in their foreign exchange. Off the mat from nothing is the success of Vietnam. Is there a further success to Vietnam, or is this as good as it gets?
Oh, I think there's a lot of potential for sort of developing Asia. And we saw that, for instance, we've seen how Singapore, Taiwan, Korea have come along. This sort of Vietnam is sort of where those tigers were, say, 30 years ago, 20 years ago.
How can they be a tiger under a communist regime?
Well, the interesting thing is they've been following the Chinese model, in which they have sort of limited political freedoms, but very much heightened economic freedom. As long as the economy's growing 5, 6, 7%, growth standards or living standards are rising, people can live with that. It's an experiment. I mean, we're seeing this in China, where that sort of compact with the pact they made with the people may be sort of breaking down. All of a sudden, youth unemployment is up at 30, 35%. The economy's struggling to grow. People can't afford houses. There's a glut. So that has started to break down. What happens? That's to be determined. But something's got to give, right? The economy is sort of slowing. I don't think they can just clamp down and continue to put the hammer down on political dissent. It's there. It's bubbling. There's a growing number of protests in China. So I think Vietnam is watching China closely to see how this sort of plays out.
And a lot of companies are saying, to the extent that they're backing off on China to ensure maybe more onshoring, friendshoring, it seems like everybody else in that region of the world stands to benefit.
Absolutely. That's a great point. India and Vietnam in particular have benefited from that. And close to home, I think Mexico and some of the Latin American countries, absolutely. That's the thing. I think that the Chinese, the policies have been so unpredictable the last couple of years. They're sort of juggling a lot of balls and trying not to drop any, but they're sort of struggling to figure out the right policy. And so this very unpredictable, and that's what markets and investors hate, is unpredictability. And so it goes to supply chains, it goes to portfolio investment. And so yes, I do see capital flowing elsewhere.
Where is your opportunity in foreign exchange? Where's the opportunity? Let's go back to classic FX win thin. Where's the opportunity right now?
Despite the sort of, I think the risks that are out there, I do think there are good stories in emerging markets. You get high yield, strong growth. I think Mexico comes to mind, Brazil to a lesser extent. I think Asia is going to struggle a bit with China again struggling. That kind of casts a pall over the whole region. I still like the dollar. I'm going to go back to be kind of old school and say talk about all the other risky investments, but the dollar is, and the U.S. is really where it's at. The U.S. economy is outperforming. Inflation is an issue, so we don't see the Fed cutting anytime soon. I think the dollar's strong. I think the equities market story is there. So I like, I'm going to stay short, sort of onshore, and say, hey, let's keep your money here in the U.S. I would say this. The one thing I've said this on some of the shows here. The one thing I underestimated was the resilience of the eurozone and the UK. Their downturns were pretty shallow, and they were kind of coming out a little bit quicker. But by the same token, their recoveries are going to be shallow also. We're not going to go great guns like the U.S. The U.S. is growing somewhere around 2-3%. Yeah. And it's a hard story to sort of overlook.
We'll get an update on that this week. Dr. Thin, thank you so much. Win Thin is with the Brown Brothers at Harriman. Futures up 9. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says a tragic mistake was made in an Israeli strike in the southern Gaza city of Rafah that set fire to a tent camp housing displaced Palestinians. At least 45 people were killed in Sunday's strike. Meanwhile, Spanish officials are discussing why they have decided to recognize a Palestinian state. Norway and Ireland also recently announced they would recognize a Palestinian state. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez calls it an historic decision that has a single goal, helping Israelis and Palestinians achieve peace.
Although it is not up to Spain to define the borders of other countries, our position is aligned with the UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 338 and with the position of the European Union. Therefore, we won't recognize change in the 1967 lines other than those agreed to by the parties.
Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. The Donald Trump hush money trial returns to court today with closing arguments. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
It has been a week-long hiatus, and the closings will set the stage for historic deliberations. The core of the case is whether Trump falsified business records to hide the payment to a porn star to keep her quiet in the lead-up to the 2016 election. The defense will argue the credibility of witnesses, specifically Michael Cohen, while the prosecution will argue the evidence is crystal clear. The payoffs were made not to have the story out leading up to the election. The trick will be turning false records charges into the felony election law offenses. The jury could get the case as early as Wednesday. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Finally, Forbes is out with its 2024 self-made women list. 31 female billionaires are on this year's list, including Taylor Swift, entrepreneur and singer Rihanna, Kim Kardashian, and Oprah Winfrey, among others. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and cousin Lisa.
It's on page 32, paragraph 4 of his contract. This is where we agree with Michael Barr to talk about Joseph Newgarden in the Indianapolis 500. How did they get the Indy 500 back into the culture, the zeitgeist of America, Michael Barr? What do they need to do?
First of all, I didn't even think they were going to run the thing because it was, as David Letterman put it, it was a deluge of rain, and it was. But boy, once the system cleared out, we got back to some good racing, and we had enough daylight to end the race. And give it up for Joseph Newgarden. He's back-to-back wins for the first time in over 20 years. I think it was Elio Castroneves was the last time
How
they
do
did
we get America back into watching whoever's going to have that quart of milk at the end?
They're doing it. They're doing it right now.
You think it's coming back?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness, yeah. Yes, now I'm a racing nut, so, I can't help it. But, yeah, you're talking the Indianapolis 500. It's those races that are afterward where it's like, okay, can we get the crowd to come back and get people enjoying it? And that's the key to the whole thing.
For the third race, Paul, I turned off Formula One. It was so boring.
No!
In India,
oh boy, don't tell Matt Miller that.
No!
I'm sorry.
No, look, wait, hold on. The first lap, there was just carnage all over the place.
Okay, that's the first lap. But, they're running 78 laps at Monaco, and I was bored. I snoozed off, and I missed Indy 500, even with the rain.
The Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway.
Yeah.
Speedway Motorsports,
TRK. Rich, was that enough car talk, Rich, to get us, did we appease Mr. Barr with that? Ratings cratered. Live chat on YouTube bottomed out. So what's Lisa? What list is Lisa on?
Lisa is on
self-made women.
Self-made billionaires,
women.
best dressed.
What are you eating over there? Gluten-free something?
No, yogurt berries.
Oh God!
It's Captain Crunch, people.
It's Full English Tuesday here on Bloomberg Surveillance. We say good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen after the long holiday weekend. NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, Dow futures down 0.1%. S&P futures, they are little changed. To the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.92%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.46%, and that is little changed. Companies making news, we'll start with BuzzFeed. If you remember last week, former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, he announced an 8% stake in the company. Well, now Bloomberg reporting that he's pushing the company to make large-scale job cuts and include more conservative voices. Those shares are higher this morning. And OpenAI, the New York Times saying it's begun training a new AI model that would succeed the GPT-4 technology. And then Bloomberg saying that OpenAI has created a board committee to evaluate safety of its AI models. And finally, the New York Times Deal Book says Adam Neumann has ended his bid to acquire WeWork. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. All of our economic indicators, and today they're ample and voluminous. Paul Sweeney, Conference Board, Consumer Confidence at 10 a.m. Before that, here in 12 minutes, S&P CoreLogic, the 20 City. It's a little dated, but nevertheless, there it is, that year-over-year number. Still lofty, 7.3%. I mean, that's a big number.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, and Damien was talking about the effervescence of the real estate.
Exactly. Well, up in his part of the world, apparently things are selling, and they're selling above listing price, and so it's
tons of economic data today. Dallas Fed Services, I don't care. Beige Book, I won't read, but I will look at GDP data into claims, into retail inventories, pending home sales, and the rest. It's a very big economic week is the answer. And of course, the economic indicators always on Bloomberg. Brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. And we thank Commonwealth and their 2,000 independent financial advisors, their commitment to our economics as well. Our commitment to the politics of the nation is through the prism of many good voices, and one of them is Terrence Haines, a pride of Oberlin College, joining us now with Pangaea Policy. This came up not once, Terry, but twice this weekend. I'm not going to mince words. How's the president's health, and what is the dialogue forward for Joe Biden given his health?
Well, what he's going to have to do is, frankly, convince everybody that he's up to the job and do a better job than he has so far. I mean, I think the nadir of this was kind of late February, early March, preceding the State of the Union with the special counsel report. He's been, it's gotten better since then. He's been better since then, but he's got a long way to go, and he's going to have to sustain for about the next 5 months the ability to show that he's so capable of governing. To me, that's the key to the entire election.
What's the optionality he has forward based on the calendar? There's now June, and then I assume the conventions, excuse me, and then there's something after that. What is the windows of decision the president and his team and Mrs. Biden have?
Well, he's got this June 27th debate, and that's going to tell you an awful lot about not just Biden's health and Biden's ability to go forward, but also how Democrats feel about it. Going into their convention soon after that, if he doesn't do well in the June debate, speculation is going to be rife that the party revolts. So there's great potential roiling around politically, which will probably express itself in the markets to some extent, given the political and geopolitical implications.
I mean, Paul, I want to make clear, Paul, that there was no ill will from the people that asked me about this weekend. They're just mystified of what the path is for the president, given his health. There was nobody was like ranting or, Republicans, MAGA ranting. There was none of that. It's just baffled almost.
Yeah, exactly. On the other side, Terry, here in Manhattan, we have got a little trial about to reconvene here today. Can you put in context what this trial for former President Trump and the other legal issues are? How are they kind of stacking up here in the greater scheme of things as we plow towards election.
Well, you got a situation where, 6 months ago we were talking about this, and we would have said, oh, well, all these trials are going to be hugely significant for the path of the election. Now it's fairly obvious that they won't be. I think there's I ask myself on the election, on the conviction likelihood, what would Tom Wolfe think? And Tom Wolfe would probably think the conviction would exist just so the judge and the jury could get through the thing, knowing that they could bucket along to an appeals process. Beyond that, I think it's a situation where it doesn't help Trump at all. It hurts him very little, frankly. You have a situation here, I think, where everybody who thinks he's wronged already thinks he's wronged. And at most what happens here is you've got some independent voters who will hesitate a little bit more, because this is a reminder of kind of the Trump circus and the Trump drama. Beyond that, I don't think it matters a lot.
How about the conventions this summer, Terry? Should Tom and I be paying attention to these things?
Yeah, you should. Yeah, you should. The conventions have turned into such pre-digested comfort food that there's usually not much there for anybody. But this time out, I mean, there's going to be a lot more drama around the Democratic convention as a result of Biden's condition, as we've discussed. And on the Republican side, I think what you need to look for is whether Trump's successful or not in consolidating support and actually unifying the Republican Party and actually starting to draw independents to him. He needs both of those, as he did in 2016. Right now, he's got neither of those. So the convention is going to tell you a lot about where that is.
Terry Haines, frame your guesstimate of what the White House, the Senate, and the House looks like the first Wednesday of November. What's your guess on which way they'll go?
Oh, I think Biden probably, aside from something that else that might happen today, I think Biden probably squeaks through to victory, and I mean squeaks on the strength of superior organization and message discipline. I think the Senate is marginally Republican and the House is marginally Democrat. So what you have is a kind of refraction of the situation that exists today, without a lot different, and the same or similar consequences for fiscal and a bunch of the other things that markets care about most.
Terry Haines, thank you so much for the brief with Pangaea Policy. Just a brilliant note. Please get that from Pangaea Policy in Washington. Paul, the overlay here. I grew up in a house where the parents, and one in particular, was nutso about the linkage of Terry Haines' world over to the stock market. And of course, as the bratty kid, I go completely opposite. I'm not sure they're linked. Where are you on that? Do you think the politics actually works?
I don't think it matters. I mean, there's definitely some issues we saw with the Trump administration on taxation, which certainly had a big economic impact for a select few groups. But by and large, the markets seem to be just say, tell me where interest rates are going to be and tell me where earnings are going to be. And I'm pretty good.
What we've heard this morning, I'm sorry, I thought Michael Kushner as a bond guy was great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's the spirit that's out there, and you felt it this weekend.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of the economy stupid, and that's probably always been one of the bedrocks for everything out there politically, geopolitically, and certainly economically. So again, for these markets, again, I think most investors feel like the Fed has peaked on rates, and maybe the rate cutting will be a little bit later and maybe less than initially anticipated, maybe the beginning of the year. But you put that with the context of we've got a pretty solid earnings outlook. Gina Martin Adams will tell you, high single, low double-digit earnings growth. That's a pretty good backdrop for risk assets, and I think that's what most investors are kind of seeing right now.
We played Brooks and Dunn last hour.
That was good.
Got a big response.
Yeah.
We're doing this for you, Paul. I mean, you're going to the BNY Inside Conference
in Nashville, Tennessee. Alex Steele and me.
You go to the Pancake Pantry. You may see Casey Musgraves.
That would be fun.
I mean, this is great. Her breakout hit, Casey Musgraves. The precision here is just shocking. We say good morning, Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele in Nashville next week. Good morning.
Wednesday at noon, and I've traded my iced tea for scotch. Keene
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. Bloomberg Surveillance on a Tuesday. First day of the week. Lots going on. It's going to be an eventful week with a ton of economic data. Paul, you kick off the economic data at 10 a.m. this morning.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. We use the eco page on the Bloomberg terminal. We got some consumer confidence coming out here. We'll take a look at that. We'll talk to the folks at the conference board to get their thoughts about the consumer.
Later in the week, personal spending, personal income. I mean, folks, it's like, we have CPI Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever it is, a jobs report and all that. This week is as big as any of those. It's just secondary data to an extent, and by Friday we'll have a different view.
Friday we get to
where
that,
we are.
Exactly, Tom. We get to that PCE deflator, which everybody says is what the Fed is focusing on in terms of inflation. 0.3% month to month, 2.7% on an annualized basis. That's kind of where the street is, kind of flat with where we were last month.
Atlanta GDP now, I'll get it right, not Chat GPT. Atlanta GDP, 3.52%. Now that'll come down. That's real GDP, but I'm sorry, it's a buoyancy in America, and we see it with futures up 7. We're on Android, we're on Apple CarPlay, we're on YouTube. Live YouTube is really good. I mean, it's really international. They go back and forth on it. There's some of it's vetted by Google. Yeah. They're like policing it and all that, but
it looks great.
It's good. And you can search Bloomberg Podcast, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast to get all of the great product that we've got. Bloomberg Surveillance in honor of Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney. Brought to you by BNY Mellon's Insight, INSITE, an incredible opportunity to network and hear from world-class speakers and Alex Steele. Take your practice to the next level, June 4 through the 6th, next week, June 4th through the 6th in Nashville. Register at insight.bnymellon.com, INSITE.bnymellon.com. Thank you, BNY Mellon, for your support. With the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
We got in a NASDAQ futures getting a little bit of a lift. Right now they're up about 0.1%. But a big part of that is a rally in Apple shares after iPhone shipments in China rebounded, rising 52% in April. Apple shares up more than 1%. And NVIDIA shares up about 3% right now, still riding that wave of last week's earnings report that showed AI computing spending remained strong. And GameStop extending its rally up 24% after raising almost $1 billion in a share sale. This week, traders looking to inflation prints, central bank speakers for any hints on interest rate timing on interest rate cuts. We already had the Fed's Neil Kashkari told CNBC that policymakers have no reason to hurry with cutting rates. As far as the bond market, we have the 2-year yield at 4.92%. That's down 2 basis points, and the 10-year yield at 4.46%. And that is little changed. Quick check of commodities. We have spot gold higher at $2,355 an ounce. Brent crude, $83.44 a barrel. WTI crude, $79.06 a barrel. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Now joining us, Greg Farinello, head of U.S. rate strategy at Amerivets, here on the state of rates and what they say about your world. Greg, there's a level of quiet out there. VIX printing 11, now 12.52. Spreads to perfection. What's the character, the nature of the quiet in financial markets?
Well, good morning, Tom, and good morning, Paul. It's great to be with you again. Yeah, look, I mean, we wrote this morning to clients. I mean, if you look at the MOVE index, rate volatility is at the lowest level it's been really since 2022. As you pointed out, the VIX and even the CDX, which tracks the credit markets here at very low levels. Look, I mean, I think right now a couple of things are going on. One, with the rate cut narrative, you have to look to Europe, right? So the ECB clearly still on track to lower rates. And I think short term here in the US, we know the first quarter, the inflationary readings have been higher. CPI came in a little better than expected. It's likely PCE follows at the end of the week. And I think right now the narrative, at least coming from Chair Powell, that the Fed is unlikely to move higher. I think markets like that notion, although that is a risk factor, to potentially lower. And then if you look out in 2025, we have a forward SOFR at the end of 2025 at 4.25. So it's a slower pathway, but right now it's still a trajectory lower. And then in general, I think the economy is tempering, but it's not falling off a cliff. And I think markets right now are enjoying that state of affairs.
So, Greg, I'm looking at the 10-year Treasury, 4.46%. It feels like we're kind of in a trading range here. I mean, the Fed will do what it's going to do, but the bond market seems like it's kind of tightly trading right here. What do you see?
So it's a good point, and we are. So we see in terms of nominal yields, 430, 470 is the range. 450, we're calling it the midpoint. We're a little inside of that on the lower end. But if you look at the market really and it's amazing how the market is so honed in on certain data points. If you look at the CPI in April to the CPI in May, I mean, we round tripped the whole thing. So we went out to, and I think we talked at the beginning of April, traded out to 470, defended that technical level pretty well. We saw good buying across the account base, credit included. These credit buyers are yield sensitive, so they love the higher yields. And then right into this softer CPI print that we recently got, traded right into that 430 level, rejected it, and now we're back in and around 450. But look, the capital markets are wide open here. The issuance calendar has been robust, and I think it's been a great environment in and around these yield levels for both issuers and investors.
So again, I guess this Federal Reserve, the higher for longer seems to be the mantra here. Do you think we'll get any rate cuts here in 2024? Or do you think the Fed might even push them out to 25?
Well, I think that's plausible. And I know we talked about it early April, and we certainly have been talking to our clients about it from a little bit earlier on in the year. Look, I mean, I think the window is closing. If you listen to Fed Governor Waller, who we think is influential on the committee, he's saying a couple of things. Like, I need not only more data, but he did reference 3 to 4 months more of data that is going to convince them that it's the right time to start lowering rates. I think the reality is, psychologically for them, it's a big step for them to take that move lower if they see forces in the secular situation right now, which could potentially move inflation higher down the road.
Greg, thank you. Greg Farinello, Amerivet, thank you so much for this morning. Mark Gurman over the weekend, power on this may have slipped by your schedule at the barbecue.
Yep.
Mark Gurman, Apple bets on giant user base to help it win in AI. And Paul, I've never done this. I actually went over to the Apple propaganda on this event June 10th. Join us online for the biggest developer event of the year about platforms, technologies, and tools. This is like a big deal to like Ed Ludlow and Mark Gurman.
I think it is. I mean, you look to these developer conferences. I mean, Apple, I think, started it all back in the day. But this is where they, oftentimes, starting with Steve Jobs, will make big product announcements. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's just, a continued evolution of the product line. You don't know really what you're going to get here. But I think a lot of folks are saying, can you give us something, some juice, so we can kind of get on this AI train?
Gurman, who's gospel on this, is Apple's in a challenging position. It needs to convince consumers and investors it's doing exciting things in AI. Help me here.
I think, a lot of Apple folks will say, hey, this is kind of textbook Apple. They rarely lead these
They're always
changes.
last. Yeah.
They let other people kind of blaze the trail. Then they come in with something just better. Whether it's a phone or a music or it's just a PC. They just come in later and they come in with just better. And that's kind of how some of the bulls are still thinking about AI for Apple.
Help me here. Project Gray Matter, that's actually what it's cost. It's going to integrate Safari, Photos, and Notes. Can they tell me how to delete 40,000 Gmails?
Exactly.
Can they tell me how to organize 40,000 photos? Lisa, how many photos do you have?
Over like 500, I think.
500?
Yeah.
No, you got to have thousands on your iPhone.
Yeah, but some got erased. I had an issue with my
Oh,
phone.
no.
I lost a couple hundred.
Tucker's got 12 photos on his iPhone. Mark Gurman leading the way on Apple. Really looking forward to that. And of course, we'll get briefed up on that. Anurag Rana joining today. As Ed Ludlow's off today, right?
Well, he's a special holiday.
Yeah, the special holiday,
Yeah.
Tesla Day.
Yep.
With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. Closing arguments are scheduled to take place soon in former President Donald Trump's criminal election interference case in Manhattan. Loyola Law School professor and former federal prosecutor Lori Levinson says closing arguments are key for both sides.
I think the defense is basically going to say to the jury, these witnesses that were brought to you by the prosecution are not worthy of your belief. They brought you a porn star. They brought you a crooked lawyer. They brought you the publisher of the National Enquirer. And they brought you people who were just after Donald Trump for their own individual reasons.
Trump is charged in connection with payments during the 2016 election to prevent extramarital affairs from going public with claims of a sexual encounter. The former president denies any wrongdoing. Just weeks after President Biden warned Israel not to attack heavily populated areas in Rafah, a deadly airstrike is now raising questions about how the White House will respond. The deadly strike targeted a location about 650 feet from a designated humanitarian area. At least 45 Palestinians taking refuge in a tent camp were killed. More than 1 million Palestinians have fled to Rafah during the war to seek refuge. Two big NBA stories today. Bill Walton, UCLA Bruins standout before becoming a Hall of Fame center for his NBA career and huge in basketball broadcasting, has died after a battle with cancer at age 71. And the Celtics are going to the finals after sweeping the Pacers in 4 games last night, 105-102. Celtics guard Jaylen Brown.
It's been nothing but a grind. We haven't skipped no steps all season. We got a bunch of great guys in this locker room, a bunch of tough guys. Our coaching staff has been great. Front office has been great. And now we want to take it to the next step.
Meanwhile, Dallas hosts Minnesota in Game 4 tonight. The Mavericks are up 3-0 in the West Finals. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Hey, Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul, let's talk about your trip to Nashville. This is exciting. Going down to Nashville, It's financial advisors with BNY Mellon.
Yep.
What are some of the topics discussed?
I mean,
what are the themes you and Alex are
I think the themes are kind of what their clients are saying. What do they need from BNY Mellon in terms of, services? And what I was shocked, the last time we met with these folks, how so many of their clients, these registered investment advisors, people who manage money for others, they're looking at alternative investments. It's not simply the 60-40 stocks, bonds. They're looking at alternatives, hedge funds, all that kind of stuff. For the retail,
is Ethereum an alternative
I don't know. I don't know, but you can now get an ETF.
They haven't made a ruling on that
No,
yet,
they haven't, but it seems like they're moving that way. That's what, I was reading some of the research from Eric Balchunas, and that's kind of where they're going.
I don't, the whole Bitcoin thing. Here's a headline. Good morning, folks.
Yep.
Elliott Management takes a $2.5 billion stake in Texas Instruments. That according to CNBC.
All right, we'll get Anurag Rana at 9:30 here.
Yeah.
We'll get to the latest on that and Apple.
15 minutes. We'll have to see on that as well. Futures up 7. NASDAQ elevated 0.2%. It's come back from the enthusiasm of 7 a.m., but nevertheless, I'm going to call it all in all a gentle lift to the market. Brent crude elevated $83.24. And the real yield, 2.13%. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures are mixed after the extended holiday weekend. NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. S&P futures up 0.1%. Dow futures down 0.1%. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.91%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.46%, and that is little changed. As far as economic data, the FHFA's March house price index, well, that was lower than expected at 0.1%. And at 10 a.m., we get a read on consumer confidence. Tomorrow, some more. We have the Fed releasing its Beige Book economic survey, initial jobless claims, GDP, and wholesale inventories. That's for Thursday, sorry. And the PCE deflator, that comes out on Friday. Over to the bond market, we hit that already. We want to get those companies making news, which is T-Mobile. It's agreed to buy U.S. Cellular's wireless operations, some of its spectrum assets, for nearly $2.5 billion. Their shares are down 0.2%. PayPal up 2%. The Wall Street Journal says it's planning an ad business using data on its shoppers. And speaking of shoppers, you had Associated Press reporting that more people taking a part in a no-buy challenge. That means they're promising to spend money on only necessary purchases. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Anurag Rana with us here in 12 minutes. We'll talk Texas Instruments. CNBC reports Elliott takes a $2.5 billion stake. I like what Bloomberg Intelligence says on that. They say Texas Instruments keeps CapEx plan as view dims. So there's some tone of it from Bloomberg Intelligence. We are thrilled to bring you now on your equity market, your bull market, Liz Young. Liz, I love your note. And the answer is, you say profit wins. What do profits look like forward?
Well, if you look at why people are buying stocks right now, I think everybody is searching for more upside. And especially after such a strong rally, it's been more difficult to find. So then trying to answer that question of where are we in the market cycle? Where are we in the business cycle? And what kind of stocks win at this point so that we can find more upside? And we did a bunch of analysis looking at what might happen to the yield curve, what might happen to the dollar, if and when the Fed finally does start cutting rates. And one of the things that is consistent is that you do want companies that are kicking out good margins, that have healthy profits, and are able to produce that kind of cash flow.
Do we grow our way in the denominator, price to cash flow, price to this, price to EBITDA? Do we grow the denominator into a more intelligent valuation?
Well, you know what's interesting is that if you look at valuations, there continues to be this comparison between now and what happened in the early 2000s. And valuations compared to then are really not that outrageous. They're frothy, and in particular pockets, they're perhaps higher than most investors would want as an entry point. But I do think over the next couple years, if we manage to avert some big catastrophe, we do need earnings to continue to grow. We do need them to come through in order to just support the current level of valuations. And then it becomes this awkward mental exercise of, okay, if the PE is coming down, that's actually a good thing if earnings are going up, but the price of the index hasn't necessarily moved all that much. I think we've been used to these double-digit returns, and we may enter a period where we're in that more regular return era of mid-single digits, but with earnings growth that's still strong.
Liz, given the move we've had off those October levels here in the stock market, the S&P 500 up, over 25%, what sectors still screen attractive to you guys, if any?
Yeah, well, that goes back to the earlier part of this conversation is where do you find that upside? And look, growth companies, particularly large cap, still seem attractive compared to small cap. You start with some of those big buckets. What's better, large or small? And at certain points in the business cycle, large cap does tend to do better. At certain types of yield curve environments, large cap also tends to do better. So if we expect that at some point later this year, which I do expect, we will experience what's called a bull steepener, meaning that the short end of the curve comes down and the long end of the curve either stays put or rises a little bit, in that environment, you do want those large cap companies, some of them growth. You do also want some of those defensive names. And although it's a bull market, there are defensive sectors that can do really well in a bull market. And utilities is one of those that has done well this year.
Right.
I would still be staying away from sectors that start with the word consumer, though.
Liz, SoFi has such a heritage of studying the technology of America within the AI frenzy. What does our technology look like forward, and can you invest in it?
Well, I heard a quote last week that was sort of resurrected from Bill Gates. It goes something along the lines of technology is always overestimated in the first 2 years, but underestimated in the 10-year period. And I think what's happening with AI right now is obviously we've got a lot of enthusiasm, and there are some real fundamentals behind that trade and behind that theme. The reality is that all themes go through a life cycle, and we're likely to see at least somewhat of a boom and bust in the AI theme, and things are going to change quite a bit over time, much like what happened with the internet theme. We didn't really know how to make money off of that early on. And I think that's where we are with AI. And at some point, we'll have to come back down to earth of we're not going to come up with these profits in the next 12 months. So I think that's sort of where that theme sits today.
Liz, I don't want to talk to you about Texas Instruments per se. I know that's not part of the game, but we've got Anurag Rana coming up here with the announcement from CNBC of an Elliott Management stake. Kunjan Sohani and Oscar Hernandez Tejada for Bloomberg Intelligence absolutely nail a company that's going to spend forward based off semiconductor development in America and that. And as a generalization, investors saying, wait a minute, who's going to win out in that tug of war between CapEx frenzy and investors saying, I want a little discipline and capital allocation responsibility? Who's going to win?
Right now, I think we are actually going through a pivot where investors are deciding that you need to be much more judicious with your spending of capital. And we saw that in some of the announcements in first quarter earnings, where you're hearing big tech companies say, we're going to spend a bunch on AI. Last year, they got rewarded for saying that. This year, getting a little bit more punished with investors looking at it as, okay, if you're going to spend, then where's the zero-sum game? Who's going to benefit from that spending? So rather than this, the pie is getting bigger, I think it has turned into a little bit more of an environment where investors are saying, you need to be responsible. I will go to the company that can benefit from some of that spending, but let's be careful about how much money we're throwing at a theme that isn't quite mature yet.
Hey, Liz, what are you telling your clients these days about opportunities in fixed income broadly speaking? Do you stick at the 2-year treasury at close to 5%, or do you maybe take a little credit risk?
I wish I had a juicier answer to this question, but yeah, I am 2-year treasuries all day long. I mean, we're at a point in the cycle where the Fed is going to have to cut rates at some point. We keep pushing it out, but at some point that short end of the curve is going to have to come to grips with the fact that the Fed will eventually embark on a cutting cycle. So I still think it offers great opportunity.
Liz Young, thank you so much for SoFi. Great equity discussion there, folks, with futures up 8, NASDAQ with an elevation as well. And again, Paul, I'm going to go back to the exuberance that I didn't sense this weekend. I guess I see it in real estate. Yeah, I see it in a lot of fancy new cars around where I live. Everybody's buying cars.
Well, and they're not.
They all
cheap.
have Apple CarPlay.
Yeah, and they're not cheap. I mean, the average selling price around $45,000. Average selling
the
price.
cars I'm looking at earn $45,000, but I just don't get the effervescence. When I look at the chart on the Bloomberg, it's a bull market.
It is. It is, and it's what we've heard from a lot of economists out there is this, if you're long risk assets, you're really benefiting stocks, bonds, real estate, that type of thing. But if you're not, then you're just dealing day to day with inflation, as we all are, but you don't have the offset of having some of those risk assets in your portfolio.
And that's the heart of the matter. A lot of people don't have risk assets, I guess, and there was some nuance. I know Zero Hedge had an article out about the hedge funds selling stocks into the last 3-4 days or whatever. I mean, I just don't get the bubbling out there, the effervescence out there to get us forward. That'll be the heart of our week here. Lots of economic data, including at 10 a.m. You'll see economic data with Alex Steele. and Paul Sweeney. Again, futures up 8, NASDAQ up 0.3%. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance into the PCI data on Friday.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how the markets open on this shortened trading week? This week, investors looking to inflation prints. We have the PC deflator being released Friday. They'll also be listening closely to central bank speakers for any hints on the timing of interest rate cuts. As we get started, let's get right to it. We'll start with the S&P 500. Right now, it is up 0.1% at 5,313. The Dow down 0.2% at 38,967. And we get to the Nasdaq right now, just kicking in, up about 0.4% at 16,991. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.91%. That's down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield 4.45%, and that's down 1 basis point. At the the open, I want to check in with Apple. Their shares up 0.7%. This is after iPhone shipments in China rebounded. And we have Texas Instruments. They're up 2% right now. And this is after a report from CNBC that Elliott has made a $2.5 billion investment in the company. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo. Blue button, the Detroit Lions blue button. I forgot to press it there. Anurag Rana would have known to press the blue button. He joins us right now with Bloomberg Intelligence. Anurag, lots to talk about, including the Apple ballet, but I've got to ask you, away from your remit, about Texas Instruments. And what I want to talk about, Anurag, and this is not Kunjan Sobhani and Oscar Hernandez Tejada that will report for Bloomberg Intelligence on Texas Instruments, way out front on a question that Elliott's bringing up. Like, wait a minute, you got all these CapEx dreams. What about us investors? Anurag, within the cloud space, within the Anurag Rana world, your universe, is the CapEx being overdone now? Is there too much enthusiasm about spend versus listening to investors that are saying, where's my return?
Tom, I love CapEx. And, what has been disappointing is, it's not it's not resounding a lot with clients as it should have, because this really gives me a very big leading indicator that the cloud demand is going to bounce back good. So I'm very happy that these companies are investing very heavy in CapEx, which means they know something that all of us don't know. I feel okay about it at all.
All right, so let's go over to our good friends Apple, June 10th. I mean, I don't know. Tom and I are thinking about booking, the Gulfstream to go out there and see what all you tech people are thinking.
They're not letting me in with a bow tie.
They're not letting you in the bow tie. What should we be looking for Apple come June 10th?
So I think it's very clear at this point, Apple's now had their big focus on Gen AI and everything around it. They really need to tell the street that they can do it better, if not better, at least match what Google has showcased in the past few months. If they don't do that, I don't think it's going to be really good for investors in the near term, because so far the story has been Apple has lagged behind and they have not done much. We have heard from Mark Gurman that they have a contract upcoming with OpenAI that can infuse some of the features in there. Now, remember one thing. Apple has the distribution. Apple has over 1 billion smartphone users. So if they can get somebody to use their products, I think it's going to help them out in the long run. But I would say a lot hinges on in this June 10th event for them.
So how do you define this overused word ecosystem? I mean, is their ecosystem nothing more than an ecosystem of convenience? Or is it a tangible ecosystem? Is it a tangible universe?
So if you think about it, Tom, the way I think about it is ecosystem of Excel users. I mean, free Google Sheets have come and gone. I wouldn't care about it. You could argue that, the same is the ecosystem for people who read Wall Street journals. Once you are in that install base, you're not going to move away. Even if I get a cheaper phone out there, I'm not moving away from Android to iOS or vice versa. So I think the real big kicker here is, do they really have the compelling next generation app where it can keep the users that may decide to either pick iOS or Android in the long run? So I think the ecosystem is sticky because once you get into one, you don't get out of it. But they really need to showcase that they have the mindset to
Paul,
keep people in it.
Paul, NVIDIA is over $1,100.
Yeah.
So they were stock splitting to 100. My first number was 97. And right now they stock split to $110 per share.
Yeah. How about, that's the way to play AI in a lot of people's minds. Wow. Hey, Anurag, we saw some reporting coming out recently that Apple's China iPhone shipments jumped 52%. What is going on with that? I thought they were losing in China. What's going on there?
So, as Paul, one of the things we learned from the last earnings call on Apple is some of these shipment data shouldn't be relied upon that heavily, because remember, this is the same source that told us Jan-Feb data was down, I think 39, 40% or something in that. But when Tim Cook came on the conference call, he said, you know what, iPhone sales were up in mainland China. So the part of the reason the stock's only up 1% and not quite a bit, I'm not expecting a 52% jump in iPhone revenue in the next quarter. I think this just shows, one thing it shows, though, is Apple's not losing out that big
Right.
as it was made out in the last 6 months. People will buy and sell depending on when the sales are, when the seasonal nature is. So I really don't put that much emphasis on some of these data points.
Explain to us, Anurag, the utility certitude that cloud, your world, the Anurag Rana world, needs electricity generation, and we're going to have to build all this stuff out. What in that theme do we get wrong? What's the distinction you say that needs to be clarified?
I think the biggest thing is, and Paul and I had discussed this a while ago, is how are they going to make up for something like this? How will you see, what are you going to do? Where is the capacity going to come from? And I think I am pretty much looking forward to new kinds of ways of doing things, people coming up with I think creative ways to utilize or make it more power and user friendly, because the power hungry nature of this particular technology is such that we're going to see a lot of build up of you could say alternative fuel rather than the renewable energy, because we do need a lot of power to run these workloads.
Hey, so Anurag, when we think about just Apple, this has been such a great stock for such a long period of time, but this China risk, it just doesn't seem to go away. When you talk to these institutional investors in Apple, how do they kind of how do they put that risk kind of to rest a little bit?
Yeah, I think I think the last earnings call as well as the data today should pacify one thing, that this is a cyclical nature of the demand in China and not so much structural shrinking. That's a very good thing for long term, and something that you and I and the three of us have discussed over the last 12 months is, you can say all you want about India and other emerging markets. At least for the next 5 years, Apple's growth in iPhones is going to come from China. Like it or not, that's reality. So I think
Right.
this is a good news, at least for the next couple of years. Now, one thing is also, I think, getting clearer, something we've been harping on for a while, is this is not a company that's going to grow sales 10% anymore. This is going to be, at best, a 5% sales growth company, and people need to get, comfortable with that. And I think a lot of people are now finally getting comfortable that that's the story. So you take 5% of revenue growth, a little bit margin expansion, and then share buybacks, you get to like 8 to 10% EPS growth rate, and that's the reality of the stock at this point.
One final question. Have you ever been to an Apple developers conference?
No, they keep it inside. They keep it very tight. I know. They have
won't
not
let 'em
invited
go.
me.
They won't. It's like an invited audience, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't even have a bow tie, so I'm definitely not invited.
Anurag Rana, thank you so much. Ludlow's the only one cool enough
Yes,
to get in.
yep.
Anurag,
Gurman's got his, he's got a cot set up outside the
we're
headquarters.
very fortunate. We talked to Mandeep Singh and Anurag Rana and their team about about this stuff in technology that I don't understand one word of, to say the least. We're churning red and green on the screen. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Closing arguments are starting in former President Trump's hush money trial in New York City. The defense is expected to attack the credibility of former fixer Michael Cohen, the only witness to testify that Trump was directly involved in the scheme to keep porn star Stormy Daniels quiet and authorize payments. Prosecutors will look to recap corroborating evidence seeking to show Trump allegedly falsified business records to cover up the payments in the run-up to the 2016 election. Adam Shalit is with Fordham University School of Law.
They don't need to prove the underlying crime. They just need to prove that when they were falsifying the business records, they were doing that in order to, with the intent to cover up that other crime.
The court has been on a week-long break for the Memorial Day weekend. Israeli tanks have reportedly reached the center of Rafah in southern Gaza. It comes as Israel targeted a tent camp for displaced Palestinians and killed at least 45 people, sparking worldwide outrage. Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner is in Tel Aviv.
This is the sort of thing that everyone has been saying to Israel is going to happen. And it has. So we'll see what kind of impact it has. I think that the world is beginning to move in the direction of talking about sanctions and greater anger about it all.
Bloomberg's Ethan Bronner. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Sunday's strike was a tragic mistake, and the military said it was investigating. Pope Francis apologized today after he was quoted using a vulgar term about gays to reaffirm the Catholic Church's ban on gay priests. Italian media yesterday had quoted unnamed Italian bishops in reporting that Francis jokingly used the term while speaking in Italian during the encounter behind closed doors. He had used the term in reaffirming the Vatican's ban on allowing gay men to enter seminaries and be ordained priests. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, the news on tornadoes over the weekend was just absolutely brutal. I'm one of these typical ugly East Coast people that never really has experienced it. I've seen from a distance maybe dark clouds, but it is just frightening.
What happens, and I've been through one, believe it or not, the sky turned green where I was. This is back when I was in the Detroit area, and I slept through it. I have to be honest with you. And when I woke up, there's trees down, billboards bent all over the place, and
And it seems now with everybody's got a video camera in their hands, we're getting much more amazing real-time video.
Yeah, the videos are
in the
amazing.
last few years, the video you've seen from some of these tornadoes is just extraordinary.
Al Tompkins at Pointer does a nice summary of this, and he says the dry, wet America shifted. It was generally the 100th meridian, all the romance of Kansas and Oklahoma, and the dry line has shifted east 140, 200 miles, and that has pushed the tornadoes into the southeast, where it's much more like if you did the Wizard of Oz now, would Dorothy live in Huntsville, Alabama?
Right.
Not a joke. I mean, it's serious stuff.
It's one of those things where, say what you want about global warming, this and that, whatever, but obviously a tornado happens when a cold front hits a warm front, and it generates a tornado, and you're seeing more and more of these now. So it's a scary thing.
Well, we say good morning to all listening, particularly on YouTube, on live chat across the Southeast. We've got a huge audience down there, and thank you so much, and hope that you are safe, that it's not just a weekend thing. This is here to stay, and it doesn't even get us into the hurricane season as well. Paul, I look at where the equity markets are, and it's a Monday churn. Dow infected, jump condition in NVIDIA.
Yep.
I mean, I sat there Friday afternoon saying, do I have the courage to buy NVIDIA, to buy my first share? I have no clue.
I think, a lot of folks will say, this is a long-term secular story. You think of Gene Munster, who puts it in the context of electricity for the market, bigger than the internet. I mean, when you think about it in those ways, in that type of way, I guess you jump on with the bulls, I guess.
And I'm like, okay, where's the correction?
Yeah.
And
where's your entry?
We're waiting.
Yeah.
Well,
they're just one soft earnings guidance away.
One announcement away from some form of pullback. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks are mixed to kick off the shortened trading week. We have the NASDAQ up 0.1% at 16,950. The Dow down 0.1% at 39,008. And the S&P 500, that is little changed at 5,304. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.91%, down 4 basis points. The 10-year yield 4.46%, and that is little changed. Now, aside from more Fed speak economic data, traders also keeping an eye on problems connected with the switch to the T+1 rule, where U.S. equities will settle in on 1 day rather than 2. We'll check in with NVIDIA shares. They're still riding the wave of last week's earnings report. Right now, they're up more than 3.5%. T-Mobile shares up more than 1%. It's agreed to buy U.S. Cellular's wireless operations and some of its spectrum assets for nearly $2.5 billion. And finally, DraftKings shares, they're lower, down 11% after a progressive sports betting tax was passed in the Illinois Senate. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and I, we got together and said, do we really want to do Trump trial or this trial or the Biden trial or whatever? It's really not our remit to do it. But we got a real responsibility at Bloomberg News to do it right. And so we are now, on this Monday, going to dive in. And you do that by The Big Take, by The Big Take, which is a wonderful podcast. And David Gurr is leading the charge on intelligent discussion of this eventful week for the former president. Closing arguments. What is said at closing arguments?
Well, in New York, it's kind of unorthodox. I think in other states, the prosecution gets to go first and defense follows. But here we'll hear from the defense first. And we're going to have the defense kind of recapitulating its argument that the prosecution didn't meet the bar. The defense called 2 witnesses, the prosecution called 20. And what's really novel about this case is what Donald Trump is charged with is falsifying business records. That is customarily a misdemeanor. But we've had the DA here in Manhattan elevate that to a felony because he's argued it's in service of another crime. That doesn't have to be proven, that other crime. We understand it to be one related to violating election laws or tax laws. But it is a high burden, always is a high burden for the prosecution to prove here in the U.S., but a high burden for them to prove. And so we're going to hear the defense poking holes in that case, saying that the case largely rests on the testimony of one Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former fixer, an unreliable narrator, to say the least.
Right.
Prosecution saying, look, we have a lot of information from Michael Cohen. He was on the stand for 4 or 5 days, but there is a substantial amount of documentary evidence here that we've introduced that proves the case.
Is it original process by the prosecution, or are there previous cases where they've said, here's a misdemeanor, but?
It is highly rare that they have this, and I think the DA acknowledged that from the get-go, that this is a rare circumstance. But there is a lot of confidence, again, based on the documentary evidence they've introduced during the course of this trial. Checks that were signed by Donald Trump when he was in the White House. They had various officials from the Trump organization on the stand detailing how the process went for them to take an invoice and sign these checks. Basically, the point that they've made is there is no way that Donald Trump, as the head of this family business, would be unaware that a deal like this, a hush money deal like this, would have been executed. And that's going to be what they hammer home today during the course of their closing arguments.
I was just seeing MSNBC was reporting that the defense says it will need 2.5 hours for its closing argument today, and the prosecution says it will need 4 to 5 hours for its closing argument. So just to give you a sense of timing there. What happens if the former president is convicted? Do we know the sentencing guidelines here?
I think that we know that this former president is going to exploit the verdict, whatever it is. If he's convicted, we say unprecedented, uncharted territory a lot, but we would really be there. And we've seen over these last few weeks the president really, former president really fulminating at these news conferences he's been giving at the courthouse. I think it's fine to suspect that that would likely continue and carry over to the campaign trail more in earnest. If you have a not guilty verdict, he's likely to see this as a vindication of what he has said all along, that this is a sham trial, these were trumped up charges. If it's a hung jury, it may be the same thing as being found not guilty to the president. He can say that the DA wasn't able to prove his case here. So we're going to see Donald Trump exploit this no matter what. I think that a conviction would just infuse this with a lot of uncertainty. There would obviously be this vacuum that would open up between the verdict and when he'd be sentenced. And of course, Paul, we're steaming ahead to Election Day, just 5 months away.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess from a timing perspective, the other trials, the other legal issues that the president's facing, it doesn't appear that any of those will, I guess, come to trial or have a major event until after the election. Is that still the timing?
Still the timing, and I spent part of the weekend reading this book by Andrew Weissman, formerly of the Mueller team, Melissa Murray, who's a professor with him at NYU Law School, and they kind of go through and annotate these 4 indictments for these 4 different cases. So the 2 federal ones, one in D.C., one in Florida, having to do with classified documents, the Georgia case and this one. And in their introduction, they set out, they rank them in terms of what the magnitude or importance are. And this was at the bottom. But what we've seen in these last few weeks is that calculus really shift, because this is really the only time that we're going to see Donald Trump in court before Election Day. We've seen the president successfully stall these other trials. And so as, again, we get closer to Election Day, this takes on more prominence. It is the moment at which he does face criminal judgment.
If he loses, does he have appeal? I mean, can he extend that process out before, I guess, he goes to jail or whatever? I mean, if he loses, what's the what?
Without a doubt, he would appeal the decision. And again, it's just an effort here to drag his feet and see what happens. And keep in mind, were he to win the election in November, this is not something that he could dispatch in the way that he could with these federal cases. So that's important both in the context of this and the Georgia case.
I mean, you are a lodestone, David Gurr, to the national zeitgeist. Is the nation into I mean, the cable TV frenzy's there. We've got it here with our 10 screens in studio, but is the nation riveted to this?
I asked that question of Wendy Benjaminson, who's in our Washington bureau. She tracks polls that Bloomberg produces with Morning Consult so closely. And it really hasn't resonated. It hasn't moved the needle. And again, getting back to what might be unprecedented about this, there is this so-called Trump fatigue. We have seen so much of this over these last few years. We haven't seen a conviction before. That could throw things out of whack, but we have seen his most ardent supporters very willing to go along with him and ignore all of the legal issues that he's been facing throughout the course of this. So I think that there is a school of thought here, Tom, that if he is found guilty, if he's not found guilty, it's something that those loyal followers will ignore. I think what's most interesting is there is still a sliver of the electorate that finds this distasteful. Maybe they're Republicans, maybe there's others who would give him a shot. They wouldn't as a result of this. I think we'll have to see, though, if we do get that guilty verdict, how that resonates.
Are you doing this all week? Are you like
I will be camping out.
You're like
on or around 100
week?
Center Street all day, because the way this works is, so we'll have the closing statements, we'll have the summations, and then the judge has to tell the jury what the charging orders are. He'll go through each of these charges and explain, what the government would have to prove, and then they deliberate, and you would get a few minutes' notice in all likelihood if there's a decision reached. The court will send out notice. Jury's reached a verdict, and then you got to move. It could be a matter of minutes, so I'll be nearby. I'll be.
No, it could be a matter of minutes, but they can deliberate into what, July?
Days. Well, they could, and I think the longer this drags on, the more that indicates that there is not a problem, but there is some disagreement among jurors.
Is there a Henry Fonda on the jury?
12 angry men.
7 men, 5 women here from New York. Yes, 12 angry men.
Lisa, Henry Fonda, 12 angry men, which describes the surveillance team well as well. David Gurr, thank you so much. David, Paul's going to be in Nashville. Next week.
What's the occasion?
It's a little offsite remote broadcast.
Offsite remote.
Yeah.
Bring Tom.
Exactly.
Bring your guitar.
We'll find some music down there.
We did Brooks and Dunn today, and Casey Musgrave's got a nice one coming up here. But, you ought to go to the Ryman Auditorium.
Yep.
See some, bluegrass. They usually open it. Maybe they have a whole bluegrass show.
Yep.
See the Milk Carton Kids. And who else? Who would you want to see in bluegrass in Nashville?
Well, let's see. Gosh, I guess,
Ricky Skaggs is not really out playing now, is he?
Is he not?
I'm asking.
I think that he is.
Okay.
I've been, Ricky, I listened to Ricky Skaggs this weekend, his Winds of Time album that had a lot of Bill Monroe songs on it. And, I would go see Ricky Skaggs.
Yeah, absolutely.
When's the last time you were there?
Years? It's been a while. Yeah, it's been years.
Some hot chicken and...
No, Pancake Pantry. We're trying to get Paul to go. They're trying to do a remote from the Pancake Pantry. Can you see Paul out on the sidewalk with all the Vanderbilt crew?
I love it.
Waiting in line to go to the Pancake Pantry?
It's summer there already, though, I imagine.
And the zeitgeist down there, folks, between, the more commercial pop country and where David's so attuned, which is in bluegrass, is the in-between. Gary Allan is a king of in-between. And this song is written by the woman that made Taylor Swift. Her name is Liz Rose. She wrote most of Taylor Swift's hits in this great song for Gary Allan. Paul Sweeney, Alex Steele, next week, Nashville.
Oh boy.
Today I heard you got a new last name. Sure didn't know it was gonna hit me this way. And the radio just keeps on playing all these songs about